Welcome back to a new love for the Jamestown Bride series by best-selling historical romance author Indiana Wake. In Love's Hardest Choice, Diana Walton sails to Jamestown determined to control her own destiny after betrayal, loss, and a lifetime of being overlooked. But when her carefully planned marriage brings unexpected friendship and unexpected grief, Diana must face the truth about her past, her faith, and the love she never meant to find. Settle in for a tender story of healing, redemption, and the courage to choose love when it matters most. Copyright Indiana Wake. Love's Hardest Choice by Indiana Wake. Chapter 1. I'm very sorry to hear of your father's passing, Miss Walton, Richard Marwood said with an apologetic sort of a smile. He was a very fine man. Thank you, Mr. Marwood. Diana's returned smile was demure and easily hid the disappointment she felt every time she thought of her father. It was not that she did not love her father, in fact it was quite the opposite. Diana Walton had loved her father very much indeed. It was only after his passing that she had found herself hurt and dejected by his behavior, even though that behavior was commonplace amongst fathers up and down the country. Quite why she had imagined that he would behave any differently in the end seemed ridiculous to her now, but still she was hurt. And I shall, of course, continue to come to you for my wife's hat. As far as I am concerned, your family are the finest milliners in all of London and I should not dream of going anywhere else in the future. Richard Marwood, middle-aged and kindly, was not only keen to say something consoling, but he was clearly at a loss as to why the daughter of a dead milliner had produced herself in his office. Good milliners that they were, the Waltons certainly did not have a contract of any kind with the Virginia Company. And as much as Richard Marwood had been a good customer, he had certainly not been what anyone could consider a family friend. Diana could see the uncertainty in his face and began to feel somewhat embarrassed. She would have to soon say something that would explain her presence. How very kind, I'm sure my brother would appreciate that, she said and felt the familiar distaste at the very thought of her brother. But he was the reason she was standing in the cramped office in front of a man she barely knew. Her brother was the reason she wanted to know more about the Virginia Company's business. Is there anything else I can do for you, Miss Walton? He said, bringing the conversation to a head at last. There is, Mr. Marwood, she began awkwardly. I was wondering if you would be so kind as to tell me something of the colony in America and the need for maids in such a place. She felt her cheeks flush. Oh, I see. He looked a little taken aback. Clearly, he hadn't envisioned their conversation taking that particular turn at all. The Maids for Virginia scheme, he said unnecessarily. Yes, exactly that. It is of interest to you? He leaned his elbows on his narrow wooden desk, peering at her over a mountain of papers. For yourself, he added cautiously. Yes, for myself. I am interested in going to the new colony in America as a bride, but I know very little about such things and would like to know more before I make a decision. Well, take a seat and I shall tell you as much as I know about it. In all honesty, it is not my particular area of expertise. Still, I will tell you what I can and, if you think it might suit you, I can recommend you to somebody in the correct office. How does that sound? He smiled at her encouragingly. Thank you. She settled herself down in a most uncomfortable and barely upholstered wooden chair before nodding for him to continue. You may or may not know that a ship recently left the Isle of Wight for America. Well, some months ago. He paused, and Diana nodded her acknowledgement. On board were 13 or so young women who had decided to accept an opportunity from the Virginia Company to make new lives for themselves in the colony at Jamestown. Each lady, I believe, must be recommended, and a list of her particular skills must be provided. Skills such as being a milliner, any housewifery skills, that sort of thing. Being able to read and write would also be advantageous. In short, the company are looking for fine young women rather than anybody with a hard life simply seeking something better, if that makes sense. Yes, that makes perfect sense. She smiled, knowing already that she was in with a very fair chance of being accepted. The crossing, I am told, is not particularly pleasant. He shrugged his shoulders, and she was glad of his honesty. That was why she had chosen to come to Richard Marwood first. Diana had heard a little here and there of the scheme to provide the colony with women as wives, but she had also heard that the Virginia Company were painting a finer picture than truly existed. I'm sure that cannot be helped. Sea travel is surely a most uncomfortable thing, especially for such a long voyage. Indeed, Miss Walton, I am told it can take anything from 2 to 3 months to make the crossing from England to America. And they are not easy months. Sea travel is also a dangerous thing. Yes, I had imagined it would be. She nodded for him to continue in his account. The land is not as developed as it is here in England. There are certain deprivations which I am sure are one day to be rectified. But a new colony so many thousands of miles away relies heavily on trade ships from England, so you can see that it would not be a home away from home. Indeed, and it makes sense, she said thoughtfully. Tell me, what have you heard about women and property? I have heard a rumor that a woman might own something of her own even when married. Yes, it is a little different there. If you became a widow, for instance, and your husband's property came to you, you would not lose it to another husband if you were to marry again. There are a number of things which go in favor of the ladies in the new colony. I imagine it is largely to win them over and to tempt them to go. The men outnumber the women greatly, and I am told that the colony might well break apart as the men become more and more disillusioned. I dare say I ought not to say such things as an employee of the Virginia Company, but I would not like to mislead you in any way, Miss Walton. And I thank you for your honesty. She smiled. I think I would still be interested in going to America as a maid. Really? Richard Marwood looked amazed. But you are well looked after here, are you not? I mean, your brother. My brother is an unpleasant man who inherited my father's business in its entirety despite having long ago proved himself to have no aptitude for it. I have been at my father's side in his business all my life, and I have a very great understanding of how it all works. I could keep it thriving for generations to come in a way that my brother certainly will not manage. And as much as my father knew this to be true, still, he left it all to my brother. It is the way of things, my dear. But a father might leave his business to a wife or a daughter in order to see that business stay alive, she objected. Usually when there is no male heir, I believe. Yes, but it is not a case in law. True, but so much the normal that it is rarely gone against, I dare say. I am very tired of what is normal in this country, she said, and, whilst it was true, she was more tired of her brother's behavior towards her. I would like to go to a place where I might work hard and be the one to receive the reward. How nice that would be, even if there are other deprivations. Only if you are absolutely certain, Miss Walton. You must think it all through very carefully before you decide to go. And you might well need the consent of your brother in the end. I don't know much about the process, you see. If my brother sees a chance to be rid of me, I'm sure he will take it. She shrugged. Well, if you do decide to go ahead, come back to me and I shall be the one to recommend you to the Virginia Company as a prospective bride. Thank you kindly, Mr. Marwood. She rose to her feet. I shall leave you in peace, I have already taken up too much of your time. Not at all. And again, you have my deepest condolences on the passing of your father. Thank you. Chapter 2. It's always easier to have the order for Stockton and Sons ready before any of the others, James. They are our biggest client and it has always served us well to keep them the happiest of all when we are so busy, Diana said with as much tact as she could muster. Her brother not only scowled viciously at her, but he also took a step toward her, leading Diana to believe he meant to strike out. I will not have you telling me how to run my business, James said, but mercifully made no further move toward her. At just 19 years old, James was 2 years younger than his sister and certainly nowhere near as bright when it came to business. Even as a milliner, he did not possess the same level of skill as her, and, at the root of all his poor behavior towards his sister was the certain knowledge that she was, in almost every conceivable way, better than he was. James had never shown any real interest in the business, choosing only to accept the rewards in the form of the fine home that their father had provided for them. But Diana's father had worked hard for the rewards, for all of it, raising himself up from the streets of London to become one of the better-known milliners in town. But with his final act, Jacob Walton had decreed that his business would be run into the ground by a young man who had only ever known its spoils and none of its grinding hard work. And not only was James lazy, but he was vain and prideful, a young man who would not accept even the quietest help from a sister who knew so much more about the business than he. He would rather thrash about without much of a clue and lose it all than admit he needed her help. Then I shall say nothing more about it, Diana said shortly. I will do no more than watch and wait and see how you fare when it all comes crashing down around your ears. How dare you? No, James, how dare you? I worked at father's side for year upon year when you did not. I learned every aspect of this trade, every aspect. And now you expect me to say nothing when I can see already that you are losing business. Your vanity will lead you into the gutter. The very place father dragged himself up out of you will merrily run towards. Well, good luck to you. Diana turned to walk out of the workshop but was pulled back roughly. I will make a success of this business and father knew that. That is why he left it to me, not you, you silly little girl. I am 21 and a woman, James. And let go of my arm before I scream for help. Help? From one of my employees? He laughed and looked smug and Diana despised him for it. They might come running but there is not one of them that would help you if he wants to keep his position here. But none of them will have a position here for long, James, she said and stared at him hard. Frustration and exhaustion had been brought to her and were made no easier by the way her brother led her to despise him so. I can already see it in their eyes. They know that you are about to lead them into disaster as well as they know that you will not listen to sense or reason from any of them either. Perhaps you have them fearing for their positions now, brother, but it will not be long before they jump from this sinking ship and begin to swim ashore. I ought to strike you, you chit, he said, his green eyes so like hers if they were not so angry. I ought to teach you the lesson that father never bothered to teach you. Why not? Why not strike me? It is the only thing you have not done, she said, straightening her spine and determined to hold his gaze and have him know just how far apart they had grown. The truth was that they had never been particularly close, but she was certain that they had once loved one another. Even though he had been born male and would have his rights handed to him whether he had earned them or not, there had always been a little rivalry on his part. James would have much preferred to have a younger sister than an elder sister, someone he could talk down to and teach and be admired by. But even with the country as it was, and its rigid rules already formed many years before she was born, no older sister truly respected a younger brother of little wit, even if they could not say it aloud. With experience, however, had come knowledge, and Diana knew without the shadow of a doubt that her brother was perfectly well aware that she had not one shred of respect for him. And as long as she stayed, what was left of their relationship would only deteriorate further still. You forget, you rely on me for the very bread on your plate, sister. And I will not give as freely and be as lenient as our father was. You mean to tell me that I ought to be grateful to you for everything I have earned? You know nothing about this business, James. You were too lazy to learn when you had the chance. I know more of it than you do. Declare that aloud in front of everybody who works here and study them closely. However much you might think you have them in the palm of your hand, James, I would wager here and now that you would see a smirk or two amongst your audience. I will turn you out, he said, his eyes blazing with the knowledge that her words were true. What if I turn myself out? I have no desire to spend the rest of my life being beholden to you for every crumb. Turn yourself out? James said with derisory laughter. Exactly that. And where will you go without a penny to your name? To America, she said and felt relieved. It was the beginning. She had said the first of it out loud and could see that he was looking at her quizzically now instead of with his customary rage. A rage she knew was born entirely of fear. He knew that he did not know this business well enough, but he would allow his pride to get in the way and it would see him in the gutter in the end. If she thought about it long and hard, if she remembered the loving, chubby-faced child he had once been, it would break her heart. But it had been a long time since he had been the little boy who loved his sister, a very long time, and she would make a life for herself elsewhere rather than stand by and watch everything both she and her father had worked for crumble into dust. James finally let go of her arm and began to pace the gray flagstone floor of the workshop. Diana studied his face without a word, looking for any sign of emotion there. She knew him well enough to be able to recognize the little stab of fear that he was doing his best to hide. She knew him well enough to know that he knew he needed her there, he needed her expertise and knowledge. But she also knew him well enough to know that he would turn his back on all of it for the sake of his pride and that if she stayed with him until she was an old woman, nothing in his attitude towards her would have changed. America, he said and paused in his pacing to squint at her. With the Virginia Company. It is my intention to go to America, to Jamestown, and marry one of the colonists. Why, are they looking for wives? He asked with yet another derisory sneer. Yes, they are, Diana said simply. And if you concentrated on anything but your own comfort and pleasure, you might know that already. I am warning you. Well, you may save your breath, for I shall not be here very much longer for you to warn. You are not going anywhere. On the contrary, I will be leaving in September. I have been accepted by the Virginia Company as a young woman without parents. And as such, it is a decision I can make without an estranged brother's consent. Estranged? Yes, we might see each other every day, James, but I can assure you that we are estranged. I see, he said and appeared crestfallen suddenly. The Virginia Company has the full support of King James in its mission to supply women to the colony in order to keep it from breaking apart. There are different prospects for women in Jamestown for the very reason that the men have realized they must keep the women happy to get them there in the first place. Do you really think that any little objection of yours, a brother not a father, would make any difference to a company sanctioned by the King of England? She almost spat the last, wondering all the while if any of it were really true. But James had not been blessed with a propensity for learning of any kind. He could read and write well enough, but it did not serve him to know what went on in the world around him. Anything which did not concern James hardly existed in his world. And for once, it would work in her favor. Then go. I would be glad never to set eyes on you again, he said and turned angrily from her. He marched out of the workshop, leaving her there alone. Diana looked all about her and realized just how much of her life had been spent in that very room. How many years she had stood at her father's side learning every bit of the trade which he finally denied her in the end. Too many to count, too many to contemplate. Diana knew that she could not let herself become attached to places and things. She could not become attached to memories. None of these things would serve her well if she wanted a life that was truly her own in the end. She must harden herself to all of it, even to forget the boy that James had once been. She would not waste her life trying to appeal to the little boy within, especially since she doubted he existed anymore. And even if he did, it had been for him to reach out to her, not the other way around. So, with Richard Marwood's recommendation accepted in less than a day, Diana knew that she had a place on board the good ship Warwick, which was due to leave Gravesend in September. And come what may, Diana Walton would be on that ship when it sailed away down the River Thames. Chapter 3. I can hardly believe that we are still alive after the battering we took last night. Diana eased her neck and knew that her entire body was still suffering the shock of the dreadful storm and the high seas of the preceding 2 days. Having never sailed before, except to cross the Thames on a ferry, Diana had found herself appalled by everything that sailing was. They slept 2 to each small hard mattress on the space beneath the upper deck of the Warwick. Within a matter of days, the smell had become appalling and the food, whilst they did not go hungry, was sometimes mercifully bland and, at others, so foul that it induced sickness even when the ship ran a steady, calm course. Worse still, time seemed to have dragged interminably and Diana began to wonder if she would ever set eyes on the promised land of North America. I cannot help but think that surviving the last 2 days is a good portent for our future. If our lives were to come to an end, surely the last hours would have proved fitting, Caroline Lawton said. Perhaps it was the horror of the last days which had softened Caroline's attitude to one in which superstition seemed to play a part. Ordinarily, she was a very determined woman of little or no romantic notion, something which had drawn Diana to her in the first place. She was very grateful for the other women, of course, and had found much to like about all of them. Constance was sensible, if a little quiet, and poor Grace was worried all the time, volubly, although she was still rather young. And was a kind woman who spent her entire crossing ministering to the maladies of others with her apothecary skills. Perhaps Julia Darnley was the only one Diana did not take to well, given that the young woman's heart and mind was so full of romance that it sometimes made it hard to think sensibly. Diana knew that she did not want romance. She did not want anything which would render her helpless ever again. She had a plan, and she intended to stick to it. I will not be happy until I am settled, even if we were fortunate enough to survive the sort of seas that might have seen another boat sink, Diana said, swallowing down a wave of nausea. I am not sure I believe in fortuitous portents. Whatever luck we have in this life, we must make it ourselves. Of course, Caroline said and squinted before closing her eyes and letting out a great breath. But forgive me, you are not well today, I can tell, Diana said and thought that anybody could tell that Caroline was unwell. The poor woman was so pale she was almost light green in color and Diana knew that she could not be blamed for silently thanking God that they had survived the awful storms and not become a wreck at the bottom of the sea. I will be back to myself once I have had a little sleep, I dare say, Caroline said in the beautifully clipped tones of a gentlewoman. And I expect dry land will see us both more intent on our plans. Indeed, Diana said with a gentle laugh. Let us hope it is not too many days hence. I am certain the worst is behind us now. As the 2 women fell silent laying side by side on the mattress they had shared since Gravesend, Diana turned her thoughts to the future. It was true that the sea voyage had unsettled her greatly and made her fear what was to come, even if she would not say it aloud. What if there was not a man in Jamestown to marry her? Or at least, not a man whom would suit her purposes well. For Diana had decided to marry a man of good means and many years on this earth. She wanted an older man, one whom she would survive by many years after his demise. And to keep her spirits up and her determination squarely focused, Diana did everything in her power to remember exactly how it had felt to truly discover the great disadvantages of being a woman. And every time she did, she really did become more determined to seek out a man who would not last long, a man who would leave her with something of her own in this world that nobody else could take. And if that was heartless, then so be it. Diana was tired of the way of things, and she knew that the only way to see that sort of justice would be to make it for herself. "Forgive me if I am soon asleep, Diana, but I am so exhausted. I think I must take the opportunity to rest fully whilst the sea is calm and treating us well," Caroline said, and her voice was already thick with sleep. "Yes, of course." She reached out and patted her friend's shoulder tentatively, as if Caroline was a horse that Diana was unsure of. "I think that is very fine advice for us both." "Sleep well, Diana," Caroline said, and as her breathing became instantly rhythmic, Diana knew that she had already succumbed to sleep. "Sleep well, Caroline," Diana whispered, not wishing to wake her. As she began to run over the details of her plan in her mind once more, Diana knew that she herself would not fall so easily into slumber. The nearer they drew to America, the more Diana knew she must be focused. She had never been a hard woman and had even imagined as a young girl what it would be like to marry for love. But everything following her father's demise had done much to toughen her, and now the very thought of marrying for love made her wince with distaste and silently chastise herself. Love would not come into it, love would never come into it. Diana Walton would not marry for love, not now, not ever. She had loved her father, she had loved her brother, and all that had done for her in the end was crush her skills and knowledge underfoot and knock the last ounces of respect for her family clean out of her. No, Diana would make sure that love never came into it. Chapter 4. Despite her plans and her determination, Diana was already disheartened before she had even stepped down into one of the rowing boats to be taken ashore. From the upper deck, standing with the 5 women who had come to be her friends, she peered down at the land which was now to be their home. It was true that there were many men lining the wharf below, most with hopeful faces. But they were all young men, none of them seeming to be much more than 30, and the youngest of them likely younger than even Diana. Everywhere looked so run down that she wondered if there was a single man amongst them who had any real financial worth. And so, it was with a sinking heart that she was rowed ashore, nursing a great sensation of having made the worst mistake of her life. But what was there for her in England now? Nothing, she knew that. She could have no hope of a decent marriage there, for she was certain that her brother, as greedy as he was vain, would never make a good settlement for her. He would see her go to whichever man would take her for the least price, and she knew it. So, she would have to bide her time and hope that the men gathered there on the wharf that day did not constitute the entire male population of Jamestown. John Watterson, an official from the Virginia Company charged with housing the maids from England, had them all quickly dispatched to their temporary accommodation. The 6 women had stood nervously on the wharf, each one trying to hide her own fears as they had said goodbye for the time being, determined that they would meet up again very soon. Diana and Caroline were driven away in a cart together, given that their respective lodgings were only separated by no more than a minute's brisk walk. Caroline was to be billeted with a man called Henry Seddon and his sister, whilst Diana was to stay with an aging merchant called Charles Stanton and his wife. Diana and Caroline's parting was brief, although it was true to say that they had both felt a little stirring of emotion. Even though they had been put so close together, their lives were inevitably going to take them away from one another very soon. And even Caroline, a woman who seemed extraordinarily aloof at the best of times, was clearly affected by it. At least I know where you are, Caroline. I will come to see you soon as I am able. Perhaps we will even see one another tomorrow, Diana said to reassure herself as much as her friend. Yes, of course. I shall see you tomorrow, I am sure of it. Caroline hurried away to her waiting hosts without a backward glance. By the time the driver pulled up outside her own lodgings, Charles Stanton and his wife were waiting for her on the doorstep. The house was one of the neater ones she had seen, being constructed well of clean and appropriately thick timber. No doubt Mr. Stanton had done well for himself as a merchant in the New World, and Diana wondered if there would be anything of worth he might have to tell her about business and industry in the colony. Miss Walton, how very tired you must be, Mrs. Stanton said and smiled warmly. Mrs. Stanton was a doughy woman in her middle 50s. She had a kindly face and a matronly air which made Diana think of her own mother for the first time in many years. It caught her off guard and made her eyes fill with hot tears, tears which she hurriedly blinked away. Perhaps the crossing and the fear-filled arrival in Jamestown had affected her more than she would care to admit. I must confess I am a little tired, Mrs. Stanton, Diana said when she had recovered her emotional balance well enough to be able to look the kindly lady in the eye without dissolving. These 3 months have seemed like 3 years out on the open water. I remember it well, even though my husband and I have been here now 7 years. She laughed. I don't think anybody forgets that voyage. Come then, let's not stand out here on the doorstep, Charles Stanton said with a laugh. Agatha would have you stand outside all day if I did not intervene. Not at all, Mr. Stanton, Diana said graciously and followed the kindly middle-aged couple into their home. Although the Stanton home was not as well appointed as the one she had just left in England, Diana thought that, in comparison with many others, it must be considered a very fine home indeed. There was much that was run down in Jamestown, much that had been built inappropriately enough that even she, a woman of no experience in such things, could see it clearly. But the Stanton home was very different, and she was glad to have been billeted in such comfortable surroundings. The maid is already seeing to it that there is plentiful hot water in your room, Miss Walton. Perhaps I should show you there first and give you a little time to settle before we eat? Agatha Stanton had already taken her arm and was leading her through the house to the room that would be hers, for the time being at least. Oh yes, how kind. Diana was feeling much in need of a thorough wash and a change of clothes finally. She had been wearing the same bodice and skirt for much of the voyage, with no facility to wash anything. She had decided not to make a mess of everything she owned. She was perfectly well aware that she had smelled better in her time, and even if she could be quickly put back to rights, she was still a little embarrassed. The room she had been given was easily as large as her old chamber at home, and there was a bed, a wooden-built wardrobe, and a large chest of drawers. And after the deprivations of the good ship Warwick, the room provided for her by the Stantons felt as luxurious to her as anything King James himself might find acceptable. Before washing, Diana hurriedly unpacked her trunk and hung her skirts and shawls so that the creases might be given ample opportunity to fall out of them. She hung her bodices too before putting one of her 2 nightgowns under her pillow while she placed the other in the large chest of drawers. Although she had been blessed with possessions enough back home, she had been advised not to bring too much with her on the crossing. There were more than 30 women on the Warwick, along with a good many male passengers, crew, and an extraordinary cargo of supplies. The women had been told to pack thoughtfully in light of such constrictions. As a consequence, Diana felt suddenly adrift without very much left that was herself. Everything about the room she was in spoke of the Stantons, not Diana. Until she married, she would no longer have a real place in the world. It offended her a little, even though her sensible self told her loudly and clearly that she did not have a real place in the world back home in England, in the heart of her own family. This was the first day, the very beginning, and she could not expect to feel that everything was settled all at once. For now, it must be enough that she was on dry land, placed in warm lodgings, and with hosts who had welcomed her with open arms. Whatever she had left to plan and worry about would wait until tomorrow. For now, all she wanted in the world was to be clean, to be changed, and to be fed. The rest of her life would have to wait for her to catch up. Chapter 5. David Thurlow is a very fine man, my dear. He has a good farm and he works very hard. I'm sure if you went out to look at his farmhouse you would be more than pleased with it, Agatha Stanton said gently as the two women enjoyed a cup of tea in the small but neat sitting room of the Stanton home. David Thurlow, a respected farmer of the town, had called upon her with the idea of tempting her into marriage. It was only her second full day in Jamestown, and the speed with which the first of her potential suitors had called upon her had made Diana's head spin. And she gathered that he would simply be the first of many. Suddenly, she realized just what an effect the shortage of women had had on the colony. But how could she turn them all down one after the other without openly stating her own aims? And if she stated her own aims, if she admitted to looking for a man with decent wealth and waning years, what person in Jamestown would think well of her? Certainly not Agatha Stanton, she was sure of it. He seemed very pleasant, Mrs. Stanton, Diana said defensively. I suppose I am just a little nervous and it will take some time to get used to all of this. I must be honest, I had not expected anybody to call upon me so soon. Goodness, when the last boat came in, there were ladies betrothed by the end of the day, Agatha said with a hearty chuckle. Although, I think you should take your time, my dear. It's not very often that women have the final say, is it? And so many men to choose from too. Between you and me, I think you should make the most of it. Agatha's voice had lowered to a whisper and she peered amusingly over her shoulder lest her husband had suddenly joined them. I thought Mr. Stanton was working? Diana said in confusion. He is, but I always look over my shoulder when I'm speaking out of turn. She chuckled again. He won't be back until very much later, he has a very busy day. And he's a merchant? Yes, predominantly in foodstuff. I'm sure that keeps him very busy. It keeps him very busy, but at least he has our daughter to help him. And your daughter is married already? Yes, she is married to a very nice young man who works on Meriton's 100. Meriton's 100? It is one of the larger plantations. He made his own way here to America, you see, and is working for Mr. Meriton so that he can earn enough to pay back his passage. Will that take a long time? He's been here for 3 years and he has almost cleared everything he owes. He is a smart young man and he will no doubt have a little establishment of his own sooner or later. They already have a fine little house. You must be very comforted to know that your daughter is married to a man who will provide well for her, Diana said, parroting the phrase she had heard spoken so many times back in England. Ah, our daughter could have married whomever she chose, for she is already to inherit her father's business one day. And it will be your daughter's, I believe, Diana said, her interest suddenly piqued although she knew she ought not to make too much of it. I mean that it will not instantly become her husband's property. No, not at all. Although I believe that it hardly matters to my daughter. They are very much in love, you see. Well, that is a wonderful thing. Diana took a long sip of her tea. You must be very happy, Mrs. Stanton, and very proud. I most certainly am. Is there anything I can do to help about the house? I would like to show my appreciation for you having me here. No, there is nothing at all. I have 2 maids and there is not so much for them to do that they cannot manage it. Are you sure? because I do not mind at all helping to prepare dinner, anything really. No, it's all arranged. Agatha Stanton sat forward on the couch they were sitting on and reached out to pat Diana's hand. Even though we do have a guest for dinner tonight. Oh, do you? Diana said. Perhaps I should eat with the maids? No, not at all, you are a guest, Agatha said and shook her head, her gray curls seeming to bob with amusement. And dear Arnold will be very pleased to have company beyond mine and my husband's. Arnold? Yes, Arnold Price. He is a dear, really. Arnold and my husband have been friends for years, ever since we arrived at the colony. Arnold was already here and had come as a widow. A widow? Diana said and found her interest piqued once again. Oh dear, that is a shame. What happened to his wife? She died some years before in Buckinghamshire. They had no children at all, and I think that Arnold needed something else to occupy him. And so, he came here to the colony as a merchant. He had been a merchant in England, and so it was easy enough for him to bring his trading skills with him and set up in America. I hope it gave him some comfort, Diana said, wondering if Arnold Price had ever married again. I hope you will not be too disheartened by your company at the dinner table, Miss Walton. Arnold Price is 2 years older than my husband. There will be nobody of your own age to keep you entertained. I am bound to say that I prefer the company of older people with experience of life and stories to tell, Diana said, and knew that it was a shameless lie. I am more interested in good conversation than young conversation. Well, I am sure that Arnold will be very pleased to know that. Agatha smiled brightly as she rose to her feet and busied herself stacking the cups, saucers, and little plates back onto the tray. It will be nice for him really, old widowers do tend to be overlooked, don't they? I shall do everything I am able to see that Mr. Price isn't overlooked at all, Diana said and stopped herself from smiling. So, Arnold had likely not married again. He had a business and clearly a home, and no children to leave it to. Everything she had worried that she would not find in Jamestown would seem to be making itself ready to be delivered to her without very much effort on her part. As she helped Agatha with the tray, silently making plans to treat Arnold Price very well indeed, Diana did whatever she could to divert herself from the uneasy feelings of guilt. After all, Arnold Price was a person, wasn't he? He was not a walking, talking, breathing inheritance. And yet with no children, who else was he to leave it to? Diana blew out a breath and smiled to herself. She would keep such thoughts at bay, they would not help her. She was alone in the world now that she had turned her back on her brother, and she would have to stick to her plan no matter what thoughts and feelings lay in the deeper recesses of her heart. That was all there was to it. Chapter 6. What a kind young woman you are to keep an old man like me company, Arnold said some weeks later when Diana had arrived unannounced at the large wooden building from which he traded. It's a cold day, and I must admit I had hopes of finding you here so that I might take shelter for a little while. Diana laughed pleasantly. Unless you are very busy, of course. Work comes in flurries, my dear. And even if I were busy, your company would be very welcome indeed, he said, and it was clear he meant it. Arnold Price was a man of 55 years who looked a good 10 years older. He coughed regularly if not incessantly, and it was clear to Diana that he was not in the best of health. Do you work here all day alone? For the most part one do. But I am not as young as I used to be, and often my houseman will come here to help me with the heavy lifting. Unfortunately, it is still part and parcel of the merchant trade. He laughed pleasantly and sat himself down on an old wooden barrel whose purpose seems to have been a makeshift seat for a very long time. The barrel was at the far end of a long counter, and Diana smiled to herself as she imagined him sitting there conducting many a long conversation with a customer to stave off the loneliness of the day. "You have a servant then?" Diana asked, digging for information. "I have 2 indentured servants, Miss Walton. My houseman and a maid." Arnold twisted his head a little from side to side as if to relieve some stiffness or pain in his neck. "Although, my houseman is coming toward the end of his term and will soon be free to work wherever he chooses. As for my maid, she has 3 years more to work with me before she is in the same position. But I treat them well, and I have high hopes that they will remain with me as employees when the terms of their indenture come to an end." "You have done very well here in America, Mr. Price," Diana said, and meant it as a genuine compliment. "I find it hard to see life as anything other than the day-to-day business of getting from one end to the other." He sighed. "The better part of my life was in England, so long ago." "When you still had your wife with you?" Diana said gently, and felt suddenly very sorry for him. Although he had been in America for a number of years, according to Agatha at least, his sorrow looked fresh. His eyes looked sad and watery, and his shoulders seemed to droop as he thought of the woman he'd lost. "I suppose it will seem strange to you. After all, you were nothing but a child when I lost my wife. It will seem an eternity to you, time enough to be over the worst. I think it is a mark of a great love that you still mourn your wife after so many years. Whilst I am sad for you, I am happy for you also, for it surely means that you have truly loved in this life. Mr. Price, I truly believe that there are very few people in this world who can lay claim to such happiness. What a wonderful way of looking at things, I must say. But I dare say it does not make it any less sad. No, but as they say, it is better to have loved and lost, is not it?" "I imagine it is," Diana said, and felt a little sad herself. "Forgive me, young lady." Arnold gently inclined his graying head in apology. "I should have been more sensitive to your own position. Indeed, it is unlikely that I will marry for love here in Jamestown," she said, but gave him a reassuring smile to let him know that he had not upset her. "But it is unlikely that I would have married for love in England either." "You did not have a young man?" "No, I did not. When my father died and left the business to my brother, it became clear that I would never make a good match. My brother is an unpleasant man, and he would never have released much by way of funds to secure me a decent marriage." "I am very sorry to hear that, Miss Walton. You are a very fine young lady, and you deserve better." "That's very kind of you," Diana said, and wondered if she really did deserve any better. After all, she had a plan to execute, and she had already decided that Arnold Price formed the larger part of that plan. Even though she liked him well enough, still it was a cold and calculating scheme, and she knew it. "So, you have had little luck so far in finding a young man who would suit you?" Arnold said in a kindly way. "No, I'm afraid not," she said with a shrug. "I suppose I am a little afraid of marriage, really. The truth is, I am not very keen to be a wife. In England, I already had my fair share of the injustices of being a woman, and all I really wanted was the right to work and earn. But the only way to do that in England is to remain a spinster, and I believe that the pulpits are still full of condemnation of unmarried women as the work of the devil. It appears that it is a game in which there is never an opportunity to win." "And what sort of work did you do back in England?" Arnold seemed genuinely interested, and Diana had to admit that there was a strange comfort in that. "I was a milliner, or at least I was apprenticed to my father. Although one more year would have seen my apprenticeship complete. Then I think it is fair to say that you are a fully trained milliner. After 6 years, what more can a person learn in the 7th? Arnold said and chuckled. "Indeed, I believe that to be true. And you could not continue in your work? No, after my father died, he left the business in its entirety to my brother. Ah, I see. And my brother, a man who was never even apprenticed in millinery, now has everything that ought to have been mine. He is such a proud man that he would not even accept any advice from me, advice based on sound knowledge. I can quite imagine my father's business will be no more before 2 years is up. And is it millinery work that you are hoping to do here? As far as I know it, there is not a hat maker here in Jamestown. I buy hats from England myself, although not everybody here wears them. I tend to order a few tricorn hats to come over on the supply ships, but I dare say I do not sell many. I think you would do better to sell a different sort of hat, Mr. Price, Diana said thoughtfully. Although there are many gentlemen here, they are harder working than the gentlemen back home. A tricorn hat is all very well for church and such the like, but it's no good out on a farm or a plantation. A simpler hat with a broad brim would be much better for a farmer, for instance. The brim would keep the rain off his face as well as it would keep the sun out of his eyes. And if it were made of leather rather than felt, it would certainly be more practical and hard-wearing for a working man. Good heavens, I can see what a great loss you would be to your brother if he could but see it. Arnold rose to his feet and stretched. But where would I order in such a hat? It's easy enough to order the standard sort of hats, but it's something a little different, isn't it? Perhaps you could order in the materials and make them here, Diana said thoughtfully. But I do not know how to make hats, Miss Walton. He laughed again. But I know how to make hats, Diana said, and suddenly she began to feel as she did when her father was still alive and she worked every day in a job that she loved. What a wonderful thing it would be to have you come here to work with me, my dear. You would certainly brighten up my day, and I think that you have a head for clever business. I would like that very much, Diana said hopefully. But if you were to marry, I dare say your husband would not be too pleased to have his wife working for another man. Perhaps there is a way around all of that, Diana said, and knew that the words she spoke in the next minutes would be vital. I know there is no forcing me into a marriage here in Jamestown, but I think that the Virginia Company expects it. After all, I could not stay lodging with Charles and Agatha forever. But perhaps I could be married to you, Mr. Price? Why on earth would a young lady like you want to marry an old thing like me? To be secure and safe and to have somebody nice to talk to, she said, and it was not entirely untrue. But what of love, my dear? You are so young, too young to be tied to an ancient. Ancient or young, when marriages are made so hastily as they are here in Jamestown, love is far from assured. At least if I am with you, I shall be allowed to work, won't I? You may work all you like, I do not take exception there. But you must understand that I am a man who, given the opportunity, will talk incessantly about his old life and his departed wife. He smiled sadly. Not that I often get the opportunity these days. You may talk to me all you want about your wife and your life back in England together. We could be companions, you and I. I dare say we could, Arnold said and smiled, his pale blue eyes just a little less sad. It would certainly be nice to have some company after so many years. And I would set to work immediately. Your business could be more than simply that of a merchant, you could become a manufacturer to a lesser extent. Are you absolutely sure that this is what you want? Arnold said and ran his hand over his graying beard as he looked like a man who was waiting to be told it was all a joke. The arrangement would suit me very well indeed. And if it would suit you too, then I would be very keen to go ahead with the marriage. I think I ought to give you a day or two to think carefully about this, my dear. And you too, of course. A lonely old man does not need much time to think when he is offered kindness and companionship. And the truth is, I do not need the time to think either, although I will take the day or two if only to ease your own uncertainty. Then I shall call upon you in 2 days, Miss Walton, and see if you still feel the same way." As Diana slowly walked away from Arnold Price's merchant warehouse, she smiled broadly to herself. She could hardly have imagined that morning that she would secure a marriage offer from just the right sort of man. A man who would easily fulfill all the necessary requirements to have her plans come to fruition. But in her heart, she began to waver a little, knowing that she had played upon his loneliness and his need to talk about the woman he had loved and lost. And yet she knew she would listen to him gladly, willingly. And she would work hard in his warehouse. She would turn his business into something truly thriving. Because in the end, Arnold's business would be her business. Chapter 7. Where has this leather come from, Arnold? Surely, there has not been a supply ship come into the wharf and I knew nothing of it? Diana said with a laugh. No, I traded for it with one of the native traders. He was in need of good sharp knives and I thought some leather might come in useful if you wanted to practice the design for this hat of yours. Oh, how wonderful! Diana said brightly, already excited to begin. And how thoughtful of you, Arnold. In the few short weeks since they had been married, Diana had found herself curiously settled and with ease and speed. Arnold made no demands of her whatsoever and she was certain that their separate sleeping arrangements in his house were as much a relief to him as to her. They really were nothing more than companions, partners in this life, and Diana found that she was already very fond of him. Not to mention the fact that she was able to work freely without worrying about the house. Whilst she could turn her hand to housewifery if needs be, the maid had it all under control. Between Eileen the maid, and Adam the houseman, the small and neat house at the very heart of Jamestown was well looked after and with minimal effort on Diana's part. And Arnold, despite his age and the long years in England before going to America, was surprisingly open in his attitude towards women in work. He did not talk over her as her brother would have when she was making a little suggestion here and there, offering ideas for changes. Instead, he always listened and gave her ideas a good deal of thought. He was not a yes man who agreed with everything, but when he didn't agree he always gave a very good reason for it. And for the most part, he liked her ideas and was keen to implement them. In many ways he reminded her of her own father, although he would not be able to leave the business to anyone other than her when the time came. So, we will soon have a very fine range of hats for farmers and planters alike, Arnold said and laughed, although his laughing brought on a little coughing. We have only to hope that the farmers will be pleased. My friend, Constance, is married to a farmer. He very rarely wears a hat, so perhaps he would be the best person to test out my own creation. Perhaps he only does not wear a hat because he cannot find one suitable. What a very good idea. Go to the man who would likely be a very difficult customer and please him, and you will find that you very easily please the rest. Goodness, what an asset you must have been to your father. And what a fine man you must have been to your wife. Really, Arnold, it was so thoughtful of you to trade your knives so that I might get started immediately and not have to wait weeks on end for the supply ship to come in. And if it pleases you, I believe that I could trade for some buckskin as well. It's soft and waterproof, perhaps that would be a fair material to make one of your new hats from. It's certainly worth a try, Diana said brightly and hurriedly kissed his cheek before turning her attention back to the leather. There was no intimacy whatsoever between Diana and her new husband, and she knew that there never would be. But there were moments of friendship and kindness, and she could see that the marriage was working in just the way she had claimed it would when she had first edged Arnold into it. And it was thoughts such as those which staved off the feelings of guilt that she had manipulated a very decent old man. My dear Jane was very good with a needle and thread. Arnold perched himself on the wooden barrel. Only this time, it had a very fine and comfortable cushion that Diana had made for him. She liked to come up with new things. I think she would have approved of you and your hats. He stared off into the middle distance as he often did when talking of Jane. But he seemed a little happier of late than he had done before. Diana wondered if having somebody who was willing to listen, knowing that he could talk as long as he liked about his old love, was enough to bring a little happiness. What sort of hats did Jane favor, Arnold? Diana asked conversationally as she lifted one of the smaller sheets of leather and laid it out on her work table for closer inspection. For the most part she wore a simple coif. She liked the comfort of them, you see. He nodded and still looked distant. But if we were going somewhere and she wanted to be seen as a little fancy, she often favored a very stiff sort of a hat, very narrow brim and a very high and squared dome. Oh, a capitaine. They are still popular, Diana said, and could see Arnold smiling at her. I never did know what they were called. But I used to tease her and tell her that if it were just a little more pointed, she would look like a witch. Arnold laughed heartily and, despite the coughing fit which seized him, he was greatly amused. Jane must have had a very fine humor. Diana laughed and was easily able to imagine a good-natured and much younger Arnold teasing his wife. She liked nothing better than to laugh. Her laughter got the two of us through some very difficult times, he said, and looked a little sad once again. She had so wanted children, but we were never able, you see. We prayed and hoped for a long time, and I knew that it tore at her very heart not to have them. But she did not let it cloud everything. She still laughed and found joy and amusement elsewhere. Diana looked up and could see that his pale blue eyes watering. She felt emotional herself at the telling of the little tale, and she immediately let go of the piece of leather and crossed the short distance to stand in front of her husband as he continued to sit on his wooden barrel. She reached out and took both of his hands in hers, blinking at her own tears of sadness for the man who had shown nothing but kindness to her since she had arrived in America. And when a solitary tear rolled down his own cheek, Diana reached out to gently wipe it away with her thumb. What a fine young woman you are, Diana. How kind you are to me in listening to all of this. I like to listen to the details of your life, Arnold. And I will never tire of hearing about Jane. And it was true, Diana often found herself pleasantly transported when her husband talked of his old life. And as for Jane Price, Diana felt almost as if they were discussing a woman she had once known. She felt a peculiar closeness to her husband's first wife. Well, this will not get your first hat made, will it? Arnold rallied himself and chuckled. And I am very keen to see how it is done if you do not mind an audience. I do not mind it at all, Diana said, and gently patted his cheek before returning to her workbench. Chapter 8. You are still fighting them off, Caroline? Diana said with a laugh. I'm afraid so. And there is one in particular who is a little determined, although I am bound to say I do not think I could marry him and still remain myself, Caroline said with an amusing wince. Although, he is pleasant. He teases, but he is pleasant. And you are happy here with Mr. Seddon and his sister? They were having tea in Mr. Seddon's sitting room, safe from the nosy sister who had a long day of procuring household supplies to keep her out of the way. Happy enough, although I doubt I could suffer Miss Seddon forever. I wish she would turn her attention to her own lack of marriage prospects and leave mine well alone. Caroline rolled her eyes and Diana laughed. Perhaps it is because you have had so many offers that Miss Seddon pays such attention to you. Ah, but I have not had any real offers, as such. I have drawn some attention and many men have called upon me, but as soon as they discover I am determinately learned, they scuttle away, glad they found it out sooner rather than later. Or at least before it was too late. Oh, goodness. Diana laughed again. But you will find a man who suits you and is happy for you to be yourself, Caroline. If I can find such a man, so can you. And you are happy with Arnold Price? I am content, I suppose. And I am happy to be working and having my expertise and skills appreciated again. It seems like a very long time since that was the case. Then you have achieved what you set out to achieve. I'm very pleased for you that things are working out as you had hoped, Caroline said sincerely. I am becoming afraid that they really are going to work out as I had hoped, Diana said and looked down at the folds of her dark blue skirt. What do you mean? Oh, Caroline, Arnold is sick. Sicker than he was? I mean, he does have that dreadful cough. Yes, sicker than he was. On Friday and Saturday, he wasn't able to go into work at all. I managed by myself, it's all simple enough, but I left him at home in the care of Eileen, the maid. I honestly thought he was picking up a little, but when he chose not to go to church this morning, I became a little afraid. He goes to church every Sunday. Yes, without fail, and without me. You know, he has never once chastised me for failing to attend. He hasn't even asked me why it is I choose not to go to church on Sundays. If you don't mind me asking, why is it that you don't go to church on Sundays? Caroline asked quizzically, and Diana was grateful for a little diversion from her guilt. I always swerved the responsibility when I could back home. My father was never happy about it, but then I was never happy about the way women always seem to feature these days in sermons. Especially the reformers, what appears to be the mainstay of Christianity in England these days. It always struck me that they saved their worst scorn for women. I could never come out of a church in England without wondering why it is that men despise us so. But they do not all despise us, and I'm sure that most of them are not even listening to the entire sermon, Caroline said with a mischievous laugh. And I am bound to say that the ministers here are not quite the same. They give a sermon, yes, but it is rather more hopeful than anything else. They seem to dwell less upon our eternal damnation and more upon what we can do in this life. There is one minister in particular who I find to be quite a sensible man, really. Kind even. Caroline squinted with thought. I always feel more as if I have been party to a very nice and uplifting sort of conversation when I come out of the church here. Not like some of the hot gospelers back home. Well, perhaps that is worth a thought now that I suspect I will need God's assistance. With Arnold? Yes, with Arnold. I cannot help but think that he's going to die, Caroline. And I cannot help but think that he is only going to die because of me. As if his death will be my punishment for choosing my circumstances so cynically. But Diana, everybody chooses their circumstances cynically, even Arnold. He wanted company, somebody to listen, and that is exactly what he got. But his wants were hardly cynical, were they? Perhaps not, but those wants were not made with you in mind. They were made because Arnold felt lonely and needed a companion. You're a young woman and you could have married somebody else for love, but you did not. Yes, but Arnold had taken care to point that out to me. I never once said that he should take care in marrying me, that I was only looking for a man who would not outlive me, one with means and no family to hand those means down to. But he's a clever and sensible man, and I think he would have already thought about all of this. I think you are making yourself feel guilty unnecessarily. After all, things go well between you, don't they? And now, whilst he is unwell, he has somebody there to care for him. And I will care for him, Caroline, Diana said and felt a little tearful. I will take care of his business and I will take care of him too. I will not always leave Arnold in the care of Eileen. Perhaps you can make use of your husband's servants in a different way. The houseman, at least, surely, he could be used to great advantage in the running of the business? That way Arnold would know that you are there for him. Perhaps that would make you feel a little better about things? That is both sensible and caring, Caroline. Perhaps the two of us are not quite so singular in our thinking as we had once believed. Wanting fairness and striving for it is a good thing, Diana. But it can be done with caring and kindness, perhaps even love. What would I do without you to talk to, my dear? Diana laughed sadly. You would have to talk to one of the other ladies. Apart from Julia. Caroline laughed. Her romantic notions still wouldn't suit the situation. No, indeed. I don't think dear Julia would approve of me at all. The two women laughed good-naturedly and finished their tea. Diana knew that Caroline had done much to soothe her, but still that guilt lingered in the deeper recesses of her heart, and she wondered if she would ever truly be free of it. Chapter 9. Jude Robbins had determined to walk up to the home of Arnold Price on the second Sunday he had not attended church. Jude had only been in the colony for 3 years, but he had known Arnold to be a most regular attendee, never once missing even when that dreadful cough of his often saw him taking a moment or two outside of the church so that he did not disrupt the sermon. For him to not attend at all must surely mean that he was truly unwell this time, and he knew that he would appreciate some spiritual guidance in a time of crisis. "Good afternoon, Eileen," he said when Arnold's young maid opened the door to greet him. "I have come to see Mr. Price if he is able to accept visitors." "I'm sure Mr. Price would be very happy to see you, Reverend." "I take it he is unwell?" "It is that dreadful cough, sir," Eileen said, and looked a little distraught. "It really has weakened him this time. He's hardly eaten anything." "And how is Mrs. Price managing?" he asked in a whisper, not wanting to be overheard by Arnold's wife. He had not yet met Diana Price, for she did not attend his sermons, and another minister in Jamestown had performed the Prices' wedding ceremony. He had already heard that she was a good deal younger than Arnold, although there had been no spiteful gossip to speak of. He believed that she worked very hard for Arnold, attending his merchant warehouse every single day of the week, and he had gathered that she was well liked amongst those in the colony who knew her. "Oh, she looks after him well, Reverend," Eileen said with clear admiration. "She never stops. She works hard to keep his business thriving and is there whenever she can be. But she has taught Adam some of the trade, and he is often there taking orders for her and selling goods while she is here looking after Mr. Price. It was a good day when she came here, really it was." "Good afternoon." A woman he supposed to be Diana Price appeared somewhat suddenly, and he looked up guiltily, wondering if she had heard him fishing for information about her. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Price. I am the Reverend Jude Robbins, and I've come to call upon Arnold. I was concerned not to see him in church again today." "Indeed, it is a great concern to Arnold that he hasn't been able to come to church. He is a good man, Reverend, and it pains him not to worship on a Sunday," she said quietly, and he was relieved that she did not tear him off a strip for discussing her character in the hallway of her own home. "Would he be well enough to allow for me to sit with him for a while?" Jude went on. "Yes, of course. I will make some tea for you both." "Oh, Mrs. Price, I will do that," Eileen said, but Diana Price laid a hand on the woman's shoulder. "You have done quite enough today already, my dear. I will make some tea for you also, you've earned it." And with that, Diana Price disappeared. She immediately struck Jude as a kind and caring young woman, but also one who was extremely capable. And if she was tending to her husband's business as well as his ailing body, then she must have fortitude indeed. As Eileen led him to her master's sickbed, Jude silently berated himself for noticing what a beautiful young woman Diana Price was. Her blonde hair was rich and golden, and her eyes a very bright blue. She wore a matching skirt and bodice, both in a russet color which suited her hair and pale skin very well. The neckline of the bodice was very modest with a crisp white cotton frill. She wore a thick cream apron over the top of her clothes, an apron which declared her to be hard-working somehow. "Reverend Robbins," Arnold said in an unexpectedly hearty tone before he began to cough. "Forgive me, this hack of mine has me in its grip currently." "Well, hopefully it will not have you in its grip for too long, Arnold. You have been greatly missed in church. And I am very sorry about it. Good heavens, man, I did not come here to chastise you. You really have been missed. I cannot count the number of people who came to me after the sermon to ask after your well-being. Now that does an old man's heart good. There are good wishes everywhere, Arnold, and prayers. And I pray myself that it all works to make you better again. You deserve to be well. I truly cannot say with any certainty that I will grace the walls of the Jamestown church ever again," Arnold said and began to cough again. It sounded like a dreadful rattle, as if his very lungs were roaming free and bouncing hard against the walls of his chest. But the coughing had given his cheeks some color, even though Jude knew that it was a false sort of wellness. They were not the rosy cheeks of good health, rather the reddened cheeks of exertion. In a face that was otherwise gray, worn, and exhausted, Jude knew it was not a good sign. "You must not say that, Arnold. You must hope for the best. And do not forget that you have a new and fine young wife to take care of you. Indeed, I count myself very fortunate. Diana is a kind young woman, always ready to listen," he said as he closed his eyes and leaned heavily back into his pillows. "So kind that I would not want to linger long and have her suffer. She will think that I married her only so that I would have somebody to take care of me in the end. I'm sure she would not think that at all, Arnold. The truth is, I married her to stave off my own loneliness. I have been lonely for years, it's true, but when a man sees the end in sight, that loneliness seems all the greater somehow. I hope I did not do wrong by her. She chose to marry you, Arnold. It's not as if you forced her into it. None of the English maids are forced. She was given her pick of the colony and she chose you, my dear man." Jude smiled at him kindly and began to wonder why it was Diana Price really had chosen to marry Arnold. But that would be to judge and to determinately search for reasons to look upon her unfavorably, and Jude Robbins was just not that sort of minister. He valued kindness and caring, understanding and tact, much more highly than preaching, judgment, and punishment. It was one of the things which had drawn him to the New World in the first place, the idea that he could escape the ugliness and cruelty of his own religion back home. He did not believe in fire and brimstone as an approach. Rather, he believed in being a loving shepherd who would gently lead his flock, not bully them. "Ah, here she is," Arnold said with a smile as his wife came into the room holding a tray. She set it down on a side table and busied herself pouring the minister and her husband each a cup of tea. "Thank you kindly, Mrs. Price," Jude said. "Please do take that seat, Reverend," Diana said and indicated the chair she herself had vacated, the chair at her husband's bedside. "Will you not sit in it, Mrs. Price?" "No, I shall leave you to talk to my husband in peace and quiet. I know that Arnold is always very appreciative of your kind wisdom every Sunday," she said and inclined her head graciously before turning to leave the room. But in the moment before she left, Jude was absolutely certain that he saw the beginnings of tears in her pretty blue eyes. Chapter 10. It was the first day of many in which Diana had been able to attend the merchant warehouse. A supply ship had docked at the wharf 2 days before, and Adam had seen to it that everything they had ordered had been moved from the wharf to the warehouse. Realizing exactly what hard work it had been, Diana had given Adam a day to himself to relax. He was a hard-working man, and he had complained immediately, stating that he'd taken his free afternoon on Sunday and did not need another. But he looked exhausted, and she knew that taking the lion's share of such arduous work alone had clearly tired him. She also knew that he secretly was pleased to be given the opportunity of an entire day to himself. It had been Arnold's idea that she spend the day at the warehouse sorting through everything that had been delivered, including the leather that she had been waiting on for weeks and weeks. And she knew that it was Arnold's way of giving her a little respite from his sick bed, a chance to do what she loved, a little time away. And to her own deep guilt, Diana had seized the opportunity with both hands. She had objected, of course, not wanting Arnold to know that she was keen for a little time to herself, even to work. But he had insisted, and she had made a very good show of giving in. But the work did not give her the respite she had hoped for, and she found herself thinking of Arnold the entire time, even as she opened boxes and sifted through all the goods they had ordered between them. "That looks like very hard work, Mrs. Price." Reverend Robbins' sudden appearance made her start. "Forgive me, I did not mean to startle you," he said, and held his hands out in front of him. As he stood in the doorway of the large, single-story wooden warehouse, Diana studied the Reverend for the first time. She hadn't noticed what a large man he was when he had visited her husband on Sunday. Perhaps she had been surprised by him, too unsettled by his presence to truly notice him. Despite Caroline's insistence that things were a little different here on a Sunday in church, still, she could not let go of the idea of preachers being harsh and unforgiving men, ones who were not at all fair to her own sex. But Reverend Robbins was smiling at her, and there was no hint of the distaste she had strangely expected to experience. And he really was very large. Surely, he'd had to duck his head as he made his way into her husband's room? Why had she not noticed it? He was a great bear of a man, with the broad shoulders and the physique of a farmer. Even his face, young and handsome, was not what she expected in a minister. He was surely only 3 or 4 years older than she was herself, and he had an easy way with him, and an open, smiling face. His hair was fair, but a little ashen where her own was gold. And his eyes were pale, a kind of grayish blue. He wore a very fine and long-tailored black coat with metal buttons, a long black waistcoat and shirt, and austere black breeches. His stockings were as white as his shirt, and his shoes were plain and clean. He carried a tricorn hat under his arm, the kind that holy men tended to wear. It was a hat which had extra material to it, material that would cover his ears and the back of his neck like a cap. From the way he carried it, Diana formed the immediate impression that he did not like to wear it. It amused her, but only very temporarily. "You did not startle me," she said, and then shrugged. "Well, you did, but I don't mind." She laughed. "And yes, it is somewhat hard work." She looked all around her at the disarray she had caused in opening all the boxes at once. "Do you not have any help?" he asked, and she realized what she had subconsciously noticed on Sunday, that he had a very rich and soothing deep voice. "I have been helped all week by Adam. But the poor man took in a great shipment yesterday, and he is truly exhausted. And so here I am today at Arnold's insistence," she said, wanting him to know that she had not chosen to leave Arnold, even if in her heart she had on that day. "Arnold is a good and clever man, Mrs. Price. He will know what a toll it takes upon you to be at his bedside every day. Everybody needs a few minutes' rest from something like that." Diana stared at him in wonder for a moment, strangely convinced that he had somehow read her mind. If only Arnold could get a rest from it. If only he were well again, she said miserably. But I do not think he's going to recover. No, I don't think he's going to recover either, Mrs. Price, the minister said, and took a few more steps into the warehouse until he was just feet from her. And I really am very sorry about that. It's why I have come to see you here today, for I was in hopes that you would be about. I wanted to ask if there was anything I could do to help you through this most difficult time. But why would you help me? Diana asked and felt her throat tighten with emotion. I do not deserve help. Everybody deserves help, Mrs. Price. Why would you think otherwise? You know that I do not attend your church, Reverend Robbins, she said, although she knew that that was not entirely what she meant. Her words had escaped before she'd had a chance to check them, and she wished she hadn't spoken at all. It would have been a simpler thing for her to politely decline his help and leave it at that. But there was something about this man which seemed to elicit responses, and she wondered if it was just her or his entire congregation who fell so easily to confessions. I do not turn my back on people simply because they do not satisfy my vanity's needs to have them listen to me every Sunday. He smiled at her in an almost mischievous way. His humor was clear. I see, she said, dumbfounded, hardly able to believe that she had heard a minister talking lightly of such things. My dear woman, honesty is not blasphemy. He chuckled. And as a man of God, I am ready and willing to help anyone and everyone. You are not excluded because of your own beliefs or lack of beliefs. You are a human being on this earth as I, and as such I would like to help you. Goodness, Caroline said that you were different. Different? Different from the ministers back home. I should hope so, he said and laughed again. But that's enough about me. I have come here with the intention of helping you and Arnold. Whatever it is I can do for you, please just name it. I do not deserve your help or God's, sir, Diana said, and suddenly felt she ought to be absolutely honest with the kind and helpful young man standing in front of her. And not just because I do not attend your church. I am not a good enough person, you see, to be able to accept such assistance. But that does not mean that I am not appreciative of your offer, because I am. And if there is anything at all you can do for Arnold, would be truly grateful for that. He will need your guidance over the coming days, especially when his time comes. And I shall be there for Arnold every step of the way, I promise. And then when you are ready, I shall be there for you. Ready? Ready to realize that you are good enough to accept my help, he said and nodded. He made to replace his hat and then seemed to think better of it, tucking it away under his arm again before taking his leave. Thank you, Reverend Robbins. Take care, Mrs. Price. Chapter 11. Very nice, Miss Seddon. Very nice indeed, Jude said as he surveyed the heavy vase filled with winter foliage. You will be glad when spring arrives, my dear, and you can make your glorious displays of bright flowers again. Indeed, but I think these dark green leaves and beautiful red berries are also very beautiful. Are not all God's creations beautiful, Reverend? She stated and turned beady little eyes on him. Indeed, they are, Jude said, thinking that he would do well to remember that even now when faced with the young woman who did so much to irritate him. Miss Seddon, he thought, spent much of her time testing people, almost as if she wanted them to fail in her eyes so that she might sit in judgment upon them. She was just the sort of young woman who thrived back in the old country, and he wondered if that was why he felt his rather guilty little animosity toward her. Perhaps not animosity, but certainly Jude could not warm to her. He secretly thought it little wonder that the young woman who had come to Jamestown to join her brother 2 years ago had yet to find a husband. In a colony which cried out for women, a pretty young woman who was overlooked was undoubtedly overlooked for a good reason. He smiled at himself and his own failings, determining to pray for her so that she might find the pathway to a more pleasant personality which would inevitably lead to a fine marriage and lasting happiness. As far as goodness went, he thought that that was as much as he could manage for her on that day. Looking thoroughly pleased with herself for having figuratively tripped up the minister and have him land full on his face, Miss Seddon walked smartly out of the church with something of a victorious air. And as Jude stood surveying the nicely arranged winter fauna, he silently admitted to God that he did much prefer the bright blooms of spring and summer. It wasn't a criticism, it was just a fact. With a sigh, Jude sat down on one of the pews and found his thoughts wandering back to Mrs. Diana Price. He'd thought of her more than once in the days since he'd seen her at Arnold's warehouse and had found himself wondering why on earth it was she thought she did not deserve God's grace. Even on their first meeting when he had called unannounced at the Price household, Jude had sensed that there was more to find out about Diana Price. There was something eating away at her, however much she tried to hide it, and he had seen it even more clearly at the warehouse. Of course, her words had proclaimed its presence, but Jude was certain that he had sensed a discord deep within her. And in his experience, a person who had decided they were beneath God's grace generally weren't. The very fact of questioning their life and their character meant that they were blessed with the ability for introspection, something that a genuine sinner rarely bothered with. There was many a man who stood in his church every Sunday who likely thought himself to be godly when he was anything but. But for so many, just the very act of attendance was enough. It was about being seen to attend church, being seen to do the right thing, rather than turning your attention inward and dissecting your heart. That was where the goodness of a person was held, deep within the heart. And any person who had the courage to look there for not only the goodness, but for whatever else might lurk, was a person who lived a life in a thoughtful way. But of course, by Jude's way of thinking, there was not a person on the earth, good or bad, who did not deserve God's grace. They were all blind men after all, each and every one of them on the earth, all searching for the flame that was lit so many centuries before. They were all as children and they all needed guidance and care. He just wondered how he would reach a woman who had decided for herself that she did not deserve such things. Of course, he knew that Arnold's needs were greater currently, or at least more imminent. The poor man did not have long in this world and he would need all of Jude's reassurance that his transition into heaven would be an easy one. And it was reassurance that Jude could give quite naturally and without a moment's hesitation. Arnold was a good man, a man who had suffered so much loneliness in America. It pained him to see Arnold silently berating himself for having married such a young woman for no more than to keep him company at the end. But that was what people did, wasn't it? They could never allow their own needs to be spoken aloud, not even to themselves, and so when they acted upon them, they could do no more than savagely stomp on their own souls. But the teachings of the day in England had set them up for just that, hadn't they? To be kind to oneself whilst being honest was not something that most people had ever been encouraged to do. It was little wonder that so many people walked the earth with such a heavy burden of guilt resting on their shoulders that they were almost driven into the ground. But Jude could not bear to see it. Of all the people he'd met in his life, he could not imagine that he had met anybody who deserved to suffer in the way that most people did routinely, albeit silently. And if he had one mission in this life that God could give him, he would have it be this, that he would do whatever he could to ease that burden, to help people to release it and to live the best life that they could manage. And perhaps he would begin with Diana Price. Chapter 12. Diana had not left Arnold's side for 2 days and nights. Even though the coughing had now subsided a little, it was clear that he did not have long left. Even with Eileen's help, still Diana was exhausted, but she could not wish it all over, not even now. She knew in her heart that she didn't want Arnold to die, that she cared about him greatly. Diana would never have loved him as a wife loves a husband, but she loved him nonetheless. She loved him as a friend might, as perhaps even a daughter might. And now she felt devastated. "Oh, Arnold, this is all my fault," she said as she rose from her chair and sat on the edge of his bed. "I wish I could take it back." "Take what back?" Arnold said in a thin and reedy voice, surprising her since she had thought him to be asleep. "Marrying you." Diana sniffed miserably and took a handkerchief from the pocket of her dark blue skirt. "Oh dear, have you been so unhappy?" His pale blue eyes were barely open. "No, of course not." "Arnold, that's not what I meant." "I don't understand, my dear, and I'm afraid if you don't hurry I never will." He laughed and coughed, his eyes becoming watery. "I married you for such selfish reasons. I was so wrong, so cynical, that I am being punished now. And you are suffering for my sins. I am suffering because it is my time to go and nothing more than that." Arnold tried to raise his arm to reach for her hand, but he was too weak. Diana scooped his hand up in her own and held it gently. The day was gray and miserable. It had been raining all night and it seemed the sun was refusing to make an obvious appearance that day. Still, it suited her mood very well. "I made a plan to marry you even before I met you. Even before the ship had sailed into the wharf. You didn't know me, how could you have made such a plan? It wasn't you exactly, but a man in your circumstances. It doesn't matter now, my dear. But it does, and I must tell you. I must confess it all to you and beg for your forgiveness before it's too late." Tears of anguish began to roll down her face. Diana hardly knew why she was choosing to tell him everything now. Perhaps it was just another selfish act, unburdening herself before Arnold died. "Very well," Arnold said with an indulgent smile. "I felt so sorry for myself back in England. My pride was so hurt when my father left our business to the brother who would do nothing but waste it when I was the one who'd worked so hard to learn all that needed to be done. Coming here was a way of turning my back on the father I'd loved, even though he was not there to see me do it. And I was determined never to be treated in such a way again. I wanted to inherit properly this time, not be swerved around in favor of a man. A son, a brother, a cousin. I wanted what I saw as mine. That is understandable, Diana. Please don't upset yourself. But what I came here for wasn't mine. It was yours. It was everything you had worked your whole life for. I cannot take it with me. And I have nobody else to leave it to. Why would I not want it to go to the young woman who has worked so hard and listened to me so kindly? You made my dear Jane come alive for me once more with your willingness to listen, and there is not enough gold in the world to repay you that kindness. You will never know what it means to me. But you don't understand, I wanted a short marriage. I wanted a man who was getting on in years who wouldn't outlive me. Then you picked the right man." Arnold laughed with more heartiness than he'd been able to muster for days. "I wanted a short marriage," Diana repeated miserably. "And I wanted someone to be with me at the end. An end I knew was coming sooner rather than later." His coughing had subsided. "And it was wonderful to have you in the warehouse with me. I did so love to hear you talking about your hats." He squeezed her hand weakly. "You must promise me to carry out your plan and make your broad-brimmed hats for the farmers and planters. You have an instinct for these things and you will do well. You will carry the business on just as you should have carried your father's business on." "It is not my business to carry on," Diana said, barely able to speak for the emotion. "It is. You're my wife and I am glad to leave it to you. When you know what I did to get it." I never thought you married me for love, Diana. And I did not marry you for love either. We simply needed each other. And we found each other. We both got what it was we were looking for, me as well as you. I can never forgive myself. This is not God's punishment, my dear. I was dying before I ever met you. I have known these old lungs of mine were not going to last for a long time now. As I said, I knew the end was not far away and I didn't want to be alone. And I am not alone, am I? I have you here with me, you kind, sweet girl. Diana felt anything but kind and sweet, and she knew she would never be persuaded that this was not her fault. I don't want you to go, Arnold, she said, her voice breaking. I know, my dear, but I must. It is my time and that is just the way of things. And you must not pity me, for I will be with my dear Jane again. She has waited a long time for me and I don't want to disappoint her. You are the dearest of men, Diana said as Arnold slipped into sleep. Mrs. Price, the Reverend is here, Eileen said in a whisper as she glided silently into the room. Diana turned to see Jude Robbins standing in the doorway and wondered just how long he'd been there. Come in, Reverend. My husband is asleep, but I'm sure he will be pleased to see you when he awakens. As Diana passed the Reverend on the way out of the room, he smiled sadly and gently laid a hand on her shoulder. Chapter 13. When Arnold Price closed his eyes for the last time, Jude realized that he felt personally bereft. When the young minister had first arrived in the colony, Arnold Price had been one of the first people to welcome him. He was a good man, a merchant who had easily become a pillar of the community, and one who had graced his sermons without fail until the very end. And yet Jude knew he had a job to do, a very important job. This was a household in mourning, a wife, a maid, a houseman, all of whom had loved and cared for Arnold Price in their own way and all of whom needed his care and kindness now. Jude had respectfully left the room in the minutes after Arnold had passed, giving his widow some time alone to say her final goodbyes. He could hear her crying even as he sat in the sitting room waiting for her, and he could hear her genuine and heartfelt grief in her sobs. After some time, the weeping subsided, and he could hear movement. Jude straightened up in his chair, ready to rise to his feet and assist whomever it was who first came through the sitting room door. Reverend, Diana said, her face pale and the skin around her eyes red raw. Forgive me, I had not realized you were still here. I shall be here for as long as I am needed, he said, rising to his feet and crossing the room to stand before her. Mrs. Price, I really am so very sorry. And so am I. Arnold was a good man. He made being here in America so much easier than it would have been otherwise. I did not deserve so fine a friend, so good a husband. Well, Arnold thought that you deserved a fine friend. He would not want you to make yourself suffer from misplaced guilt. And what would you know of my guilt, Reverend? Diana said with surprising hostility. For if you truly knew it, I very much doubt that you would be so ready to forgive. Forgive what, Mrs. Price? Forgive a young woman's fear in a country thousands of miles away from home? Forgive that same woman's need for security when she had known what it was to have that security taken from her in the blink of an eye? Why would I not forgive that? Why would anybody not forgive it? You do not know all of it, Reverend. You have the bare bones, it is true, but the blackest part of my heart you do not know, she said defiantly, willing him almost to guess again. I don't want to argue with you today. I know that you're suffering. And I would not argue with you except to have you know that I am not worth your care. And you would like me to leave, he said, realizing that he was truly not wanted there. No, I would not like you to leave, Reverend, Diana said with a measure of alacrity. Eileen and Adam do deserve care. They cared greatly for their master. They have looked after him well for so many years, and I know that Arnold would want them to be comforted. Forgive me, Mrs. Price, but I know that Arnold would want you to be comforted too. He knew he had to try again, but he could already see by the look on her face that he would get nowhere with her that day. But why should he expect such instant results? Just because he was the minister? Because he was a holy man who had given over his life to God and his community? No, nothing was ever as simple as that, and neither should it be. If he wanted to be worth his title, he would have to be prepared to earn it. Where is Eileen now? He went on when she said nothing in response to his words. She has gone out into the kitchen to make tea. I said I would do it, but she wouldn't hear of it. I dare say she would welcome the distraction from her grief for a moment. Many people use work as a way of managing the dreadful feelings which come with loss. Quite so, Reverend. Perhaps I could go to her now and have a few words? Yes, of course. You know where the kitchen is. Yes, of course, he said and silently walked out of the room. When he was on the other side of the sitting room door, she called after him. Reverend? Yes? Thank you for your care. Thank you for your care of Eileen and Adam. You're welcome, he said, nodding at her slowly before heading off to the kitchen. Jude found Eileen in the kitchen sobbing as she poured boiling water onto the tea leaves. Her hands were shaking, and she looked small and vulnerable, the tiny figure of a maid in the middle of a large, square kitchen. Eileen, he said gently, crossing the room and reaching out both hands for her. Eileen turned, but instead of taking his hand, she collapsed into his arms. Jude embraced her tightly, feeling that he had needed the comfort himself also. He remembered his own words and knew that, in this instance, his own work was blessedly distracting him from his own grief. Forgive me, Reverend, Eileen said, straightening up at last. There is nothing to forgive, my dear. I am so sorry. We knew he was going, for days and days now, we knew it. But still it's a shock, isn't it? I can't quite believe that I will never take him in some tea again or listen to him whistling. I can't believe that I won't hear him making jokes with Adam or telling Mrs. Price wonderful stories of his dear Jane. We've all lost so much, haven't we? Yes, we've all lost a great deal today. Arnold was a good friend to us all. And he was my friend, sir. Even though I was his servant, he was still my friend. He always treated the both of us so well, not just me but Adam too. Then I dare say this is a doubly upsetting time for you. Oh no, Reverend, I have no fears for my future. Mrs. Price is a kind woman and she will be a fine mistress, I know it. She is as good in her heart as my master was. Then I am pleased for that much at least, Eileen, he said and began to help her setting cups and saucers on the tray she was preparing. I know she has only been here with us for a few months, but she fitted in here immediately. She cared so much for Mr. Price, even if they were never going to be in love. I suppose marriages are more than simply a romantic match at times, aren't they? Jude said, remembering his own misgivings when the previous boatload of young women had arrived. He had presided over 4 of the weddings, each of them decided upon in a matter of days, and he had felt certain in his heart then that such matches were not God's plan. But as he'd seen the same people getting on with their lives, making the very best of things, Jude had been forced to rethink his initial position. He'd realized then that people did not only help themselves with such marriages, but each other. Perhaps they were not the best of circumstances in which to swear a life together, but if both parties were committed, he knew now that some good could come of it. She was like a very good daughter to him, Reverend. And she not only listened to his every word about his beloved wife, but she encouraged him to talk about her. I know there will be those who think she only married him for his possessions and his business. Forgive me, I even thought that myself in the beginning, but in the end, it really wasn't like that. She really cared for him, Reverend, you must believe me. Eileen seemed suddenly determined that Jude should not think ill of her mistress. Of course, I believe you, my dear. I have already seen it with my own eyes. Don't give up on her just yet, sir, Eileen said and scrubbed hard at her eyes with a crisp white handkerchief. She will hold herself apart to punish herself, I can tell that much. You mustn't let that happen, you must keep trying. Have no fear, Eileen, I shall not yet give up on Diana Price. I shall never give up on Diana Price. He smiled reassuringly. Now, shall we take this tea through into the sitting room? I'm sure Mrs. Price and Adam will be much in need. Thank you, Reverend, Eileen said and took a deep breath to gather herself before she finished laying the tea tray. Chapter 14. 2 weeks after her husband had been buried, Diana was making the short walk through town from her home to the warehouse. It was a cold and bright day, the blue sky confidently declaring that spring would soon be with them. It was the sort of brisk day that she had always loved back home in England, the sort of day which always lifted her spirits. But as she sauntered along on that day, the sun itself could not have cheered her. She had felt ever more down in the weeks since Arnold had passed, and time had certainly done nothing to lessen the great guilt she was still feeling. As she passed by the church, her eyes were inextricably drawn as she thought of the years of worship Arnold had given in those very walls. Good morning, the Reverend called out, waving to her as he walked out of the church. Good morning, she said and waved back before turning her attention to the ground and continuing to walk briskly to her destination. She had no desire to be rude to Jude Robbins, she just did not want to encourage conversation. Diana was not a part of the world her husband had inhabited, she was not truly part of the community and she knew she did not deserve the comfort that could likely come from becoming a part of the minister's large congregation. But passing the church had reminded her how alone she was. How tempting it would be to wander into the church, to join that congregation and take whatever comfort that belonging could provide. But how welcome would she really be? Surely, all of Jamestown knew the blackness of her heart and would want nothing to do with her. She would just have to content herself with the kindness and loyalty of Eileen and Adam. They had both helped so much in the last weeks and Adam had single-handedly kept the business running whilst she had mourned the husband she had once wished dead. But had she really wished him dead? Perhaps she had before she had met him, when he was nothing more than an idea, a part of her plan. But Arnold Price, the man, the fellow human being, surely, she had never looked upon him and wished him away. Good morning, Diana. Standing outside the warehouse store was none other than Caroline Lawton. In the last 2 weeks, Diana had almost forgotten that her friend existed. Caroline had done what any gentlewoman back home in England would have done. She had attended the funeral but had quietly respected a house of mourning from a distance. And Diana had truly missed her, for she found it necessary now to hold herself back from running the last steps towards Caroline and throwing herself into her arms. Caroline, you are out early, Diana said, trying her hardest to maintain a level conversation. I have wandered this way for several mornings, my dear. I had really hoped to find you here at your work sooner or later. Well, it certainly is a relief to see you, Diana said as she unlocked the front door of the warehouse. Come in, she said with a smile. Good heavens, this really is immense, Caroline said with some wonder as she walked into the warehouse and looked at the well-stocked shelves. Forgive me, but how on earth are you to manage all of this? The same way Arnold did, Diana said and removed the heavy cloak. laying it on Arnold's wooden barrel. He always managed alone with a little help along the way from Adam. And I shall do the same. How are you managing? Really? Caroline asked gently. Probably better than I deserve to be. Diana, you must stop this. I know we both had our plans as we sailed here to America, but that does not make either one of us terrible people. Every man in this town had a plan too, a plan to find himself a wife who would suit his needs. They read the lists of our skills and quietly determine if we will suit them. But they do so out of necessity, just as our plans were made out of necessity. You cannot take it all upon your own shoulders, for surely we are all to share the weight of such a burden. I understand what you are trying to tell me, Caroline, but Arnold was not one of those men, was he? He had no expectation that he would marry again, and the Warwick sailing up the River James was nothing more than a curiosity to him. He never asked after my skills nor worked out how I would suit him best. He deserved better. I am sure there is much you did for Arnold to make his life comfortable and pleasing in the short time you knew him. You must learn how to untangle your old plan from the reality, for they no longer fit together. I should never have sought to gain in the way that I have. Look at me, I now have everything that I had wanted when I left the shores of England. But now that I have it, I realize I have never been more miserable in my life. That's because you are grieving for a man you had come to care about. Of course, you are miserable. But tell me about you, Caroline. Tell me something frivolous that will take my mind away from my own cares for a while. Perhaps I can do no better than tell you about Brent Stamford, Caroline said, narrowing her gaze and shaking her head in exasperation. That is the man who is determined to make a bride of you? Diana said with a smile, feeling the immediate relief of conversation that did not center around herself and her own misdeeds. Yes, but only after he has asked just about every other woman who climbed down from the Warwick. Caroline laughed, and Diana was amazed that a gentlewoman of pride and careful upbringing could find amusement where most other women would find only insult. I begin to feel like the last apple on the stand. No, you must not think that, Diana said and laughed. You have just not been ready to agree to any terms at all in order to find a husband. You're most certainly not the last apple on the stand. I am bound to say that Mr. Stamford is extraordinarily determined and even a little persuasive. You are beginning to like him? I don't know that I'm beginning to like him, Caroline said slowly and thoughtfully. Perhaps I am just coming to admire his persistence a little. If his persistence makes you happy, do not let your old plans get in the way, Diana said thoughtfully. If you have a chance of happiness, you must take it. And perhaps you will have the chance of happiness again someday. I don't think so, not now. Perhaps if I had not been so single-minded then, I might already have been happy. If I had married a man of my own age and learned to love him for himself, I might have lived a better life. Diana, there was a reason for you marrying Arnold Price. I know, my own selfish reasons. Perhaps they were in the beginning, or perhaps they were just self-preservation. Whatever they were, those reasons did not persist. You cared for Arnold, I know you did. But Arnold knew as well as you that neither one of you had looked for love and romance in that marriage. And Arnold Price struck me as a kind and caring man who would not have expected you to live out the rest of your life without such things. My goodness, perhaps you did spend too much time between decks with Julia Darnley, Diana said and laughed. I do believe you have become a romantic. Perhaps just a little, my dear friend. Caroline laughed too. But all of this is not getting any work done, is it? No, I suppose I ought to get on with it. And I shall get on with it by your side, my dear. What would you like me to do? Caroline asked and began to remove her own cloak also, the gentlewoman determined to do a day's work. Chapter 15. When Jude looked up from the pulpit to realize that Diana Price formed part of his congregation that day, he could hardly concentrate. It had been some weeks since he had last seen her, and she was the last person he had been expecting to appear before him on a Sunday morning. Jude had been out to the house more than once, of course, but had only ever seen Eileen and Adam there. He'd asked after Diana, naturally, only to discover that she had thrown herself into her husband's work and was attending the warehouse every day alone, leaving Adam to his duties about the house unless she absolutely needed him for heavy lifting. Several times he had determined to make his way to her, to simply present himself in the warehouse as he had done once before. But it was clear to him that she was not yet ready, or at least she hadn't been. When she had waved and smiled and determinedly walked away from him, Jude knew better than to go after her. Sometimes patience was the hardest choice. A person could not be forced to accept help, he knew that. And whilst he had no intention of ever giving up on her, remembering his promise to Eileen, still, he knew that time was a great healer and he would have to wait patiently for his chance to do the job he meant to do. But Jude knew that there was more to his sudden inability to concentrate fully than his determination to help Diana. There was just something about that young woman which had his thoughts turning to her time and time again. Perhaps it was her ability for introspection, the idea that she was studying herself so closely, judging her motives, looking at her own flaws. In a world full of denial, introspection was certainly a rare gift. But it was a gift with which Diana was going to punish herself, and Jude couldn't bear it. Not only had he heard from the household servants that Diana had treated her husband with nothing but kindness and care, he had heard it from her own lips on the day that Arnold had died. He had stood silently in the hallway outside Arnold's bedroom and heard Diana confessing everything that was in her heart. She had not shied away for a moment, she had not sought to give an excuse of any kind. And yet she did have an excuse, a very valid one. The fact that she had chosen not to use it set her so far apart from everybody that Jude could not stop thinking about her. "Good morning," Jude said, knowing he must begin. "Good morning," the large congregation mumbled in reply. "I would like to give you all a sermon today on the subject of kindness." He looked down at the notes he had made the night before and disregarded them entirely. It's good to concentrate on kindness for very obvious reasons, and we often concentrate well upon the need to show kindness. But how often are we kind to ourselves? How often do we see the kindness we have done others and understand the worth of that kindness in this world? He asked, and found himself looking directly at Diana. She held his gaze for just a moment before looking away, appearing to study the bright early spring blooms which Miss Seton had so artfully arranged. When we understand the effects of our kindness, it encourages us all to continue in our work, he said, letting his gaze wander around the room and knowing that he must not make his sermon acutely personal. When we have listened to another and soothed them in their time of need, we should look at the good we have done. It is not just right to do so, it's good, old-fashioned common sense. The more we realize the good that kindness does, the more we are encouraged to do it. But in order to give kindness, we must be kind to ourselves. First, we must open our hearts to the idea that we have done some good in this world, for it is only then that we are encouraged to build upon that good, to keep doing that good time and time again. As he spoke, the words coming to him more easily than anything he could have written, Jude found his eyes flicking back in the direction of Diana. He hoped that she was heeding his words as everybody else in the room seemed to be doing. He tried to concentrate on the faces of others, seeing how well they were taking to his ideas that morning. And it seemed that everybody liked the idea of kindness, and everybody liked the idea of recognizing the kindness in themselves. Of course, The religious training they had likely received in years gone by would have concentrated upon the need to give kindness and that its receipt somehow made a person less worthy. But Jude Robbins followed his heart as he always did, speaking from it and knowing that his words were true. If only his words could reach the woman they were designed for, if only he could do that much good that day, it would all be worth it. By the time the service was over, and the congregation had sung their hearts out, Jude wondered if he had managed to reach Diana at all. He was keen to have a few words with her at the end of the service but knew that he would be constrained by the presence of everybody else. And so, he stood by the door and shook hands with each member of his congregation as they left to go about their day of rest. "Miss Lawton," he said and smiled at Caroline, silently conveying his gratitude for clearly having persuaded Diana to attend. "I hope you're well." "I am, Reverend." Caroline smiled her gratitude and moved on. "Good morning, Mrs. Price," he said and felt suddenly tongue-tied. "I'm very pleased to see you here today." "Thank you, it was a great comfort," she said, although he could not tell from her expression if she truly meant it. "Good day to you." She nodded briskly before turning to hurry away. Jude made the rest of his goodbyes in something of a haze, berating himself silently for not being able to come up with anything more relevant or comforting, not even one single word that would have suggested to Diana that he cared. Chapter 16. 2 weeks later, Eileen showed the Reverend into the sitting room, much to Diana's surprise. Still, she had been attending church in the last weeks and perhaps she ought not to have been quite so surprised by his visit after all. "I hope I'm not intruding, Mrs. Price," the Reverend said as he made his way into the sitting room. "Not at all, please do sit down," she said, thinking that she would at least not have to crane her neck to look up at him. Every time she saw Jude Robbins, she was taken aback by the sheer size of the man. He really ought to have been a man involved in physical labor of some kind, perhaps a planter, not a minister. And she was sure that there were many holy men who would have agreed. But then most holy men, in her experience, were far from kind. No doubt kindness such as that displayed by the young minister would quite naturally unsettle such men. "Although spring is just about upon us, I'm afraid that there are still a great many people in need in Jamestown," he began, and she was surprised that he had not mentioned her own circumstances at all. When she had seen him appear in the doorway, Diana had been certain that he had come there to once again try to relieve her of her guilt. When he had opened the conversation in another direction altogether, her eyes had widened in surprise. "Yes, it's not quite the promised land that the Virginia Company claimed it to be," she said with a sarcastic smile. "Not for everybody, at any rate. No, a good number of people with less than modest means came here in the beginning and they are still working hard to pay back their passage. Not all of them found fine homes to work in as indentured servants, you see, and so they must pay back the Virginia Company directly." "And there are many who struggle to?" Diana asked, realizing that she had much to be grateful for in her own circumstances. "There are a number of extremely poor people here in the colony, Mrs. Price. It reminds me that I have much to be grateful for, Reverend. For one thing, I shall never have to pay for my passage here, shall I? Arnold paid the Virginia Company with £150 in weight of tobacco, so I do not have such concerns." She paused for a moment before continuing, speaking almost to herself. "He willingly paid out such a weight of tobacco when he knew then that he would not live long enough to gain much benefit from our union. And he likely knew he would not live long enough to gain much benefit from the money he parted with either. If I knew Arnold at all, he would have seen it as a very easy price to pay for your kindness and your company. No, you will not let me off so easily, Reverend Robbins," Diana said, but she smiled at him. The truth was she was feeling much less antagonistic towards the young minister than she had done in the beginning. Although, she was certain that the first sermon she had heard him speak had been entirely doctored for her benefit, she had been impressed with the further two she had heard in the following weeks. He really was as different as Caroline had claimed him to be, and she found she could not help but like him, not only as a holy man, but for the kind and sensible man he seemed to be. You must forgive a man for trying, Mrs. Price. Especially when it's that man's job, his particular job. He laughed, and she thought him suddenly very young-looking and handsome. Surely, he could be no more than 3 or 4 years older than herself, 5 at the most. She wondered, if only briefly, why it was he had not chosen a wife himself when the Warwick had sailed into the wharf. But of course, he was not a wealthy man. He was a man of God, one who likely lived very frugally. And perhaps he had thought such marriages wrong, although she was bound to note that he had certainly never given any sign of that when he had conducted them. No, I commend you. You do your job well. She laughed. So, how can I help? I trust you have come here to secure my assistance. Indeed, I have. Ever since Jamestown has been blessed with the arrival of ladies, charity has become something of a thriving business. In short, a group of ladies who arrived on the Marmaduke some months before you have been gathering good clothes and blankets from those who can afford it so that we can redistribute them to those who cannot. But I'm a little short of ladies to help me give out these goods and was wondering if you might spare an afternoon? Yes, of course. I realize that you are a busy woman, of course. Adam is always keen to help me in the warehouse, and I am certain that he would relish an afternoon to himself there. He really is very good with the customers and always seems to manage to sell a little more than I do. She laughed self-deprecatingly. So please, name your day and I will help. Perhaps Thursday afternoon would suit you? Yes, that would suit me very well, she said with a smile. I will walk down to the church at midday and meet you. Thank you kindly, he said and paused for a moment before rising awkwardly to his feet. Well, I shall let you get on with your day. Thank you. I'll see you on Thursday, she said, rising politely to her feet. However, she knew that the politest thing she could have done would have been to offer him tea. But in her heart, Diana knew that Reverend Robbins had not come to her with the particular intention of having her help him in the distribution of alms to the poor. He had used it as a tool, certainly, and his main aim had been to reach her, and she knew that the longer she spent in his company, the more he would try and the more likely he would succeed. As she watched him leave, shown out by Eileen, Diana felt certain that she was not yet ready to be reached. Chapter 17. When Thursday came, Diana realized that she felt just a little lighter than she had done in the many weeks since Arnold had passed away. She was looking forward to a different activity, to being somewhere other than at home or in Arnold's warehouse for a change. And surely it could not hurt her soul at all to do something for somebody else, to help those in need. But as she put a little extra care into her appearance, putting on a pale green skirt and bodice with a dark green velvet cloak, she knew that there was a little more to it. Diana did not think she particularly wanted to impress the Reverend, and yet she did not want to fail to impress him either. It was a curious thing and something she knew she would eventually come to study at length, like so much else of her personality and prior decisions. As she walked to the church, she knew it wouldn't do her any good to think about it anymore until she was alone again. She would have to concentrate hard to survive the afternoon without giving the Reverend an opportunity to save her soul. Diana was still not sure her soul was worth saving. "You're early, Mrs. Price," the Reverend said as he came out of the church with an armload of clothing. "I was just getting the cart loaded." "Then I will help you, Reverend. That's what I'm here for." Diana immediately walked into the church, removing her cloak and bonnet as she went. Perhaps we ought to load these boots and shoes in first, Reverend. You will crush the clothing beneath them otherwise. Very well, I shall follow your lead, he said with an amused smile. In no time at all, Diana had the cart packed in the most efficient way possible. It was a simple enough task for a woman who predominantly ran one of the largest merchant establishments in the colony single-handedly. I'm already wondering how I managed before without you. The Reverend laughed. Well, shall we? He said and gave her his arm to help her up into the cart. It was then that Diana realized that they were to be the only two on that afternoon's charitable little mission. She had fully expected that there would be another lady or two in their company, one of the good ship Marmaduke's ladies who were already settled in Jamestown. But perhaps they had no inclination to give out charity at the side of the woman who had married an aging man for his money. Perhaps the very idea of her involvement had put them all off. Why did none of the Marmaduke ladies come? Diana asked and could hear the vulnerability in her voice. She spoke. Jude climbed up into the cart and sat down heavily beside her, taking up the reins as he did so. He turned to look at her quizzically and she could see no guile there. She was certain that whatever he was about to tell her would be the truth. There were none who could come today because of their own responsibilities on various farms and plantations and what have you. Two of the women who helped to collect all of this are able to help me on Saturday in the afternoon, and one is able to help me on Monday of next week. That should see all of this delivered, I think, he said. Diana breathed a sigh of relief. Why do you ask? It is silly, forgive me, she said and looked away. No, nothing you have to say is silly, he said, and his deep voice soothed her. She found the words coming out of her mouth before she could stop them. I had thought that the other women had heard of me and did not want to be out with me, that is all. But why would they not want to be out with you? The woman who married dear Arnold Price for his money? Diana shook her head as if Reverend Robbins was the most naive man in all the world. Why would they think that? When they all came here to improve their own prospects not only in terms of marriage, but in wealth and stability, why on earth would they judge you? Because I judge me. Well, it would seem that you are your harshest critic, Mrs. Price, he said and chuckled before rattling the horse's reins and urging him onward. I knew I should not have said anything. Diana laughed, feeling a little silly. You have an answer for it all. Another part of my job, Mrs. Price, he said and continued to chuckle. The first charitable case of the day was a man who had determinately earned his reputation as the town drunk. Claude Bowman was not a young man, but neither was he as old as Arnold had been. She judged him to be somewhere in his late 40s, although years of heavy drinking had easily carried him into his next decade. Are you getting enough to eat, Claude? The Reverend asked as he and Diana made their way into the one-room timber shack, the outer walls of which had been covered in a thin layer of dried mud. The worst thing was that it did not stand out as poorly built amongst so many other poorly built structures, and Diana wondered how it was that the skill of architecture and construction seemed to have been lost somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. I have plenty to eat, Rev, Claude said a little waspishly. It's a nice drop of drink that I'm lacking. Perhaps that is a good thing. Jude winced, and it was clear that he expected a backlash. Maybe for you, but I ain't getting any closer to God than I am now. So, I might as well drink myself to death. Claude laughed as if he had made a fine joke. Well, whilst you're waiting to go, you might as well see if you can get any use out of these boots, Diana said, and Claude laughed again. They ought to fit you, they look about your size. Indeed, they do look my size, miss, Claude said and continued to stare at her. I like you, you're funny. Yes, she is, isn't she? Jude agreed. And pretty too. Claude nodded furiously and held out his hand. Well, let me have a look at the boots then. As Claude tried on his new boots and walked up and down in them, a look of pleasure on his face that they not only fit but were comfortable, Diana felt her spirits rise. It was an odd sensation, one that she hadn't felt for some years, she was sure of it. She smiled at Claude and he smiled back before removing a battered tricorn hat and swaying downwards into a most elaborate and amusing bow. Thank you, kind lady, Claude said and beamed. Pretty lady. He looked to the Reverend, raising his eyebrows. Yes indeed, a most pretty lady, the Reverend said, agreeing with him and catching Diana's eye in a way which made her hold her breath for a moment. Good heavens, that hat has seen some service, Claude, Diana said and reached for it. I think you need a new one. I don't think we have any hats on the cart, Jude said and squinted in thought. No, there are no hats on the cart. But it is not another tricorn hat that Claude needs. Diana smiled brightly even though the fumes of strong liquor threatened to overwhelm her. You need a hat with a broad brim, Claude. I have some very fine leather which my husband got for me before he died. I was supposed to make hats with it, a new kind that would suit this area so much better than the silly tricorn hats, she said and looked disparagingly at the battered article. But I never did. Do you mean to make me a hat from scratch, miss? Claude asked and beamed all the brighter. I do mean to make you a hat from scratch, Claude. Diana agreed, nodded firmly. And how is it you know how to make a hat, miss? Claude went on innocently. Because I am a milliner by trade, Claude, she said and saw Jude's eyebrows rise in surprise. Yes, I served a long apprenticeship under my father and am a very experienced maker of hats. Then you are precisely what is missing in this colony, Mrs. Price, Jude said and laughed. Perhaps I might try one of these broad-brimmed leather affairs for myself instead of that curious and silly cross between a hat and a cap that I am forced to wear. For a man who is forced to wear it, I'm bound to say that I have never seen it on your head. Diana laughed, jumping a little when Claude also boomed with hilarity. Ah, you have caught me out. The Reverend bowed a little and smiled at her, his grayish-blue eyes looking wide and amused. She had noted him as a handsome man before, but now he became suddenly attractive to her. Through her smiles, Diana bit her bottom lip as a means of bringing herself back to her senses. But she was enjoying the moment, the unexpected amusement of spending time with a man of God and a man a little worse for the drink. Instead of concentrating on her most determined misery, Diana decided to enjoy the curious little conversation while it lasted. Then it looks as if I must make you both new hats, she said brightly. I shall make it my own little mission next week. Thank you kindly, pretty lady, Claude said heartily. Yes, thank you kindly. Jude held her gaze for a moment. The way he looked at her, Diana wondered for a moment if the Reverend had stopped himself before he too referred to her as pretty lady. Chapter 18. Is Miss Seddon out? Diana asked in a whisper when Caroline greeted her in Henry Seddon's sitting room. Yes, you need not whisper. They are both away from the house. Caroline seemed highly amused. You are not at all keen on my host's sister, are you? I'm afraid not, Caroline. She does look at me in church in a most unfriendly way. I think she is of the opinion that I married Arnold for his money and she is not as keen to forgive me as the rest of the town. Because the rest of the town see nothing which required forgiveness, as I have told you before, Caroline said with a sigh. Follow me to the kitchen, I will make us both some tea. Very well, Diana said, surprised by the idea of a gentlewoman making her own hot beverage. The maid is very busy this morning with laundry. She has taken every piece of linen from the bedrooms and is hard at work with it. I would not want to make her day any harder than it is already, Caroline said with a warmth that Diana had not expected. No doubt Caroline had enjoyed a life with many servants, somebody to see to her every whim if necessary. And yet there was still caring in her heart, caring for the lower orders that Diana had not expected. Perhaps, in the end, everybody had hidden depths. Yes, quite so. But to return to the subject of my host's nosy and judgmental sister, I do not think her annoyance is provoked by your marriage to Arnold Price, Caroline said, and there was a mischievous glint in her eyes as she set the pan of water on top of the burning stove. Really? Really, Caroline said and ushered her friend into a seat at a large scrubbed wooden table whilst they waited for the water to boil. I think that Miss Seddon has her heart set on our dear minister. Oh, you think she has a liking for Jude? Jude? Caroline said, her eyes bright still. Yes, I do. Then what is that to do with me? Well, you are close enough to him to refer to him as Jude. Caroline laughed, and it was the first time that Diana had seen any sort of girlish excitement in her. Only because I have been helping him of late in distributing alms to the poor. And hats, Diana added with a smile. More practical hats of my own creation. Yes, I saw the minister wearing one the other day. Although I'm not sure it suits him particularly, not with his liturgical garb. Caroline was still laughing. Although, I see that dear Constance's husband, the farmer, is clearly pleased with his. I don't remember ever seeing him wearing a hat before. Yes, the hats have been well received, she said and smiled, thinking of her promise to Arnold to go ahead and make the hats from the leather he had bought for her. And nobody has been more pleased with their new hat than poor Claude. For now, Caroline said and shook her head. For on another day he might very well turn angry with you for no reason, believe me. It is only the effect of drink, the poor man. Then it's a good thing that he has kind folks such as yourself, Anne. Jude, to help him. Caroline, I do believe you are teasing me, Diana said and found that she was rather enjoying it. I am teasing you, Caroline said in the bluff and blunt way of the upper classes. Only now it was a tone that Diana had come not only to understand, but to welcome. Sometimes the differences between people were no more than a matter of tone. Although, I am not teasing you entirely. To return to our poor Miss Seddon and her unrequited love, I am bound to say that it is not your behavior which upsets her but rather the minister's himself. But what has he done? My dear Diana, can you not see that he holds you in high regard? Yes, he is very pleasant, Diana said and knew that she was diverting as best she could. By high regard I mean that he cannot keep his eyes off you whenever he is giving his sermon on Sunday. Perhaps nobody else might notice it except me, your friend, and Miss Seddon, your rival. I truly do not wish to rival Miss Seddon, believe me. You mean to tell me that you feel nothing at all for the handsome young minister who has been tripping over his own feet to help you from the very moment you met? It was clear that Caroline was enjoying herself greatly. Now if I were sitting here drinking tea with our beloved Julia Darnley, then I would not be at all surprised by this conversation. But am I not in the company of my dear friend and ally, Miss Caroline Lawton? Or have you changed so much since arriving here in Jamestown? Diana laughed. If I am honest, I have changed. But then haven't we all changed? All 6 of us who set off from Gravesend on that day, we have all been changed by our experiences. We have all rethought our plans and hopes and dreams, haven't we? Yes, I suppose we have, Diana said and knew that she had been silently denying her growing attraction for the minister for some weeks. But I am not so sure that I deserve Jude Robbins' regard any better than Miss Seton does. Isn't that a matter for the minister to decide for himself? Caroline said in her customary clipped manner. And knowing you both, I can state unequivocally that you most certainly do deserve the minister's regard far more than Miss Seton. Dear me, she is a most pernicious and unpleasant woman. Caroline shuddered amusingly. Good heavens, is she as bad as all that? I hope that you never come to know her as I do, my dear, but I am bound to say that she has proved herself to be a rather cunning and underhanded young lady. She is a little too determined to be close to officialdom in the colony and stirs a little unrest at times by sneaking them information that they do not need to have. She has not done something to you, has she? Diana asked, finding herself even less likely to warm to Miss Seton than she had been before. No, not to me, but I think that she might have taken against our dear and Wallace in some way. Miss Seton does not believe that a woman ought to practice the art of the apothecary and would seek to declare it to be something rather unholy. Good heavens, and is not in trouble, is she? No, she's not. But I shall keep my eyes open. You need not worry about it. My point is, Diana, if you would stop diverting me, that you are absolutely worth Jude Robbins' regard. And you are sure of his regard, are you? Diana asked and shook her head. I am certain of it, Caroline said and rose to her feet. Ah, the water is finally boiling. She disappeared across the kitchen to begin the process of making them both some tea. Chapter 19. Forgive me for calling on you at such an hour, Mrs. Price, but I am in great need of your assistance. When Jude was shown into the sitting room by a concerned-looking Eileen, his agitation was clear. Whatever is it? Diana asked, already rising to her feet. It's Claude. He has drunk too much this afternoon even by his standards, and I am told that he fell very badly in town. One of the Virginia Company officials had bundled him into a cart and unceremoniously dumped him in his own poor abode without any thought as to how he would manage. One of the parishioners has come to me with their concerns, somebody who is too afraid to deal with Claude when he is both in pain and very much the worse for drink. I am not afraid to deal with Claude, no matter what, Diana said and was already striding through the sitting room to gather up her heavy cloak. Please be careful, Mrs. Price, Eileen said, following her mistress out into the hallway and wringing her hands as she did so. Claude is a wretched creature at times, but at others, he's unpredictable. He can lash out even when he doesn't mean it. You must be careful, really you must. I promise I will be careful, Eileen, Diana said and squeezed her maid's hands reassuringly. And I will be with your mistress, Eileen. Fear not, I will not leave her there alone. Oh, that is a relief, Reverend, Eileen said and stood aside to allow them both to leave. For a moment I thought Eileen was going to bar our way, Jude said and laughed as he helped Diana up into the cart. Well, I think you are going to have to take care of me, otherwise my sweet-natured, kindly maid will never forgive you, Diana said teasingly. And rightly so. He reached for the reins. And I would never forgive myself if I did not. I am sure that Claude will be perfectly all right, she said, hoping rather than believing that to be the case. When they arrived outside Claude's tiny dwelling, Diana could hear him groaning in pain. She hurried inside and saw him lying on the tiny, stained mattress which served as his bed. The hat she had so lovingly made for him had been placed with care on the floor at the side of the mattress, and it made her feel suddenly a little emotional that the man, however drunk he was, had still appreciated the kindness. Oh, Claude, Diana said as she hurried over to him, dropping to her knees at the side of his mattress. Where does it hurt, my dear? Oh, hello, miss, Claude said, ceasing in his groaning for a moment and smiling at her. My knee hurts and my hip too. I don't know what happened to me. Perhaps somebody gave me a beating. No, Claude, nobody did this to you, Jude said, kneeling at Diana's side and smiling down at Claude. You fell, my friend. You must have tripped over something down in the town and landed very badly. Oh, is that what happened? Claude said and winced as he tried to turn over. Can you bend your knee, Claude? Diana asked, keen to discover the severity of the man's injuries. Without a word, Claude bent his knee and then straightened it again before repeating the whole process, grumbling and swearing throughout. And his hip seems to be moving fine as well, Jude said, whispering into her ear. That's a relief. Yes, but we must stay with him. We cannot leave him here alone like this. You wouldn't happen to have a drop about you, Rev? I'm choking with thirst here, Claude said, and Jude smiled. I'm afraid not, Claude. How about we make you a nice hot drink? He looked doubtfully about him. Yes, we could manage that. Diana rose to her feet and set off to light the fire. And it wouldn't hurt to warm this room up a little. As Claude drifted off into a surprisingly restful slumber, Diana set about starting a fire. Jude disappeared outside, returning with an armload of dry firewood some minutes later. In his lucid moments, Claude does look after himself, he said, nodding at the wood in his arms. Here, let me help. Diana reached out to relieve him of some of the logs, inadvertently brushing his muscular upper arm as she did so. The little touch, almost nothing at all in its brevity, sent a rush of feeling through her body. She closed her eyes for a moment and turned her attention back to the fire she was building. This was attraction and she knew it. But it was the first she had ever felt in her life, she was sure. Diana cast her mind back to her life in England and realized that she had never truly given much thought to love and romance before, beyond the silly dreams of childhood. She had thought of marriage, yes. A good marriage. But never actual love. Perhaps that was because she had never crossed paths with a young man she had ever felt such a thing for. And if she had, perhaps it would not have been quite so easy to marry dear Arnold Price. If she had known what it was to feel truly attracted to somebody, she would never have been happy to settle for nothing more than the friendship that she and Arnold had shared. She sighed a little too loudly, drawing a look from Jude himself, as she wondered why it was that life and feelings were all so complicated. No wonder she had been drawn to the practical and pragmatic Caroline Lawton above all the other friends she had made on board the Warwick. Perhaps they were the only two who didn't understand romance because they had never experienced it. One blessing about an abode as small as this is that it warms up much more quickly, Jude said with a smile before turning to look over his shoulder at Claude, who was now snoring with such vigor that it was a wonder the dried mud walls didn't crack. The Lord himself will get no sleep for Claude's snoring, he said in a whisper, his face full of mischief, like a boy. Indeed. Diana laughed at the idea. In the end, Claude slept through like a baby, not stirring at all until first light. Diana had fallen asleep in the curiously comfortable armchair, a battered thing which, apart from the mattress, was the only furnishing in that one room. Jude had insisted she take some rest whilst he watched over Claude, and she thought she felt every bit as looked after, as cared for, as the man blissfully sleeping off the liquor. Did you sleep at all? She asked in a dry voice when she finally came to and saw Jude sitting on the floor, leaning carefully against the flimsy wall. No, but I shall rest when I get back to the church. I have a feeling I might be out here again this afternoon. I'd like to be sure he's all right. He gave Claude a kindly look. Yes, while the drink is still upon him, it is hard to be certain that his injuries are not more serious than they appear to be, Diana said. I will return with you later. I will ask Eileen to make him a hearty stew that we can warm over the fire. With luck he would have slept it off by then and be ready to eat something. That's very kind of you, Mrs. Price. Please call me Diana, Jude. If the truth were told, there really was only ever one Mrs. Price, and I am not she. Very well, Diana, he said and smiled at her, staring into her eyes for just long enough to make her skin feel warm. Well, shall we? He rose to his feet, standing above her and stretching out a hand to help her up. Chapter 20. Poor old Claude, Eileen said sadly as she and Diana peeled and chopped vegetables for the stew. I have a little salted beef that I was keeping back, should I put that in? Oh yes, of course. Some nice red meat would do him good. Diana nodded vigorously. And the stew should keep for several days, shouldn't it? If he keeps himself sober, he will be able to heat this every night for a week. That ought to make him feel a little better. Eileen disappeared to the larder, returning with a hard lump of salt beef wrapped in brown paper. It really is very good of you to help Claude. And the Reverend, too, is a nice man. I must say, I much prefer him to the old minister, God rest his soul, she said and winced before casting her guilty eyes skywards. That bad? Diana chuckled. Absolutely terrifying. I lost sleep after his sermons, I can tell you. Well, I am glad to say that Reverend Robbins does not feel the need to frighten the living daylights out of everybody. And all in all, I think it makes him much more helpful, of much more use to the people he serves. Yes, I believe that too, Eileen said. And forgive me, but he likes you very much. Oh, not you too, Eileen. Diana tried to laugh it off despite the fact that her cheeks were already flaming. What? Eileen said innocently. Caroline is already saying the same thing. Is that such a bad thing, to have somebody as kind and decent as Reverend Robbins have an interest in you? You forget, I was married to Arnold. Yes, I know that, but this is not the same thing, Eileen said and began to speak a little more cautiously. I mean, the Reverend is your own age, isn't he? His feelings for you will be very different from my old master's feelings for you. It seems a little too soon to be thinking about such things. Diana said, realizing this time that she really did want to talk about it. In a town where people are married the day after meeting? Eileen let out a highly amused snort of laughter. By Jamestown standards you are dragging your feet. I see what you mean. Diana joined in the laughter, feeling relieved that her maid did not think any the less of her for having fond feelings for another man. But I cannot help but feel that Arnold is barely cold. You have been without him longer than you were with him, Eileen went on. And believe me when I tell you that Mr. Price would have understood. He would have understood if you had married somebody the next day, believe me. I think I have known that all along about Arnold. It is I who cannot forgive myself. Forgive yourself for what? For marrying Arnold to suit my own purposes. I wanted the security of knowing I would never have property and my livelihood stripped from me ever again. That's why I married him. That is why I married a man so much older than me. And Arnold needed somebody to care about him, somebody who would not fall in love with him. Because you see, he could never have fallen in love himself, could he? He only had room in his heart for Jane, and so he married you for purposes of his own. And I think it gave him some pleasure to do a little good with what he knew he would be leaving behind. He was a very special man, really. It does not matter what the accepted way of things are, Arnold Price only ever saw what was right, and he did not think the way your father and brother treated you was right at all. It would make him smile now to know just how well you are doing with his business, especially the hats which have become so popular with the men of the town. You must forgive yourself, or you will never live, and that would be a terrible waste. You really are so kind, Eileen. Both you and Adam, I would never have managed this without you, Diana said and felt the tremble in her voice as her emotion threatened to break through. And we are glad to have you here. It is a good thing for the both of us that you have taken on the master's business and made such a success of it. I'm not sure what either one of us would have done without so much security. For everything that has happened to me since I arrived, I had never imagined that people would treat me as kindly as they have done. The Stantons, when I first came here, taking me in until I was married. Arnold, giving me a place in the world without a second thought, and you and Adam, always by my side, not to mention Jude and Caroline. And, of course, the ladies I made this voyage with. I have met with so much that is good that I begin to feel my determined low mood is something of an insult to the world. That's more like it, Eileen said in such a jolly fashion that Diana could not help but laugh. By the time the stew was finished and poured out into a large clay pot with a lid ready for transportation, Diana began to look forward to the afternoon ahead. The idea of helping Claude made her believe that she really could become a part of the community in a way that she would never have dreamed of in the first weeks after Arnold died. And it pleased her to think that the idea of community had become more important to her now than the idea of atoning for a sin. She had confessed to all those closest to her what she had believed to be the blackness of her heart, only to discover that not one of them saw it that way themselves. Perhaps there really was a way for her life to move forward and for true happiness to come to her at last. And perhaps, as both Caroline and Eileen had said, Jude Robbins really did care for her after all. Chapter 21. It's a little cold in here again, isn't it? Diana said the moment they walked back into Claude's humble abode. I'll use the rest of that firewood. And I have some more in the back of the cart, Diana, Jude said and smiled. Whilst you were preparing the stew, I was chopping firewood. Then between us I'm sure we will be able to keep Claude going for a while longer. She smiled and watched him disappearing outside again. Her eyes followed him, and she studied him for a moment as he ferried a large supply of chopped firewood to the little store at the side of Claude's house. He must have spent a good part of his day chopping wood, and she wondered when it was he could have taken the rest that he had declared he would have before returning with her that afternoon. Still, he didn't look any the worse for it, appearing as fresh and as handsome as ever. The only difference was that he was now wearing very ordinary clothes, simple brown breeches and high boots with a plain brown waistcoat and an old tan-colored overcoat. And to top it all, he was wearing the hat that she made for him. Out of the clothes of the cleric, he looked very different indeed, and the hat finally suited him. There was so much about Jude Robbins that made him seem like anything other than a minister. He did not have the ways, the sharp nature, the perpetual judgment in his eyes. And now that he was not wearing the garb, he looked much as any other man might. But Diana knew that one brief look inside that man's heart so easily declared him to be a true man of God, more so than any other preacher she had ever met in her life. And he was not the sort of minister who set himself apart, or above, his congregation. He was a man, made of flesh and blood the same as the rest of them, and he did nothing to hide that. He was a human with the same wants and needs as all other humans, and Diana found herself truly hoping that he did, after all, feel for her what she had come to feel for him. Here, this should be enough wood for tonight at least, he said, striding back into the room with another armload of firewood. He set it down by the fire and helped her to hook the heavy clay pot onto the rail above it. Once the fire was truly roaring, the stew would be heated in no time. As Jude took over and tended to the fire, Diana made her way across the room to where Claude still lay sleeping on the mattress where they had left him just hours before. "Claude," she said gently. "Claude, it's Diana," she went on when he did not respond. She wondered for a moment if she ought to let him continue to sleep, but she knew with certainty that a hot meal would go a long way to repairing him. And with that in mind, she reached out and gently touched his shoulder. Claude seemed to come to life very suddenly, and he cried out as he turned sharply on his mattress and swung an arm towards her. His closed fist landed a heavy blow on her shoulder, knocking her off balance as she crouched at the side of the bed, sending her sprawling backward across the room. With his assailant dealt with, Claude simply closed his eyes and went back to sleep. As Diana sat dazed in the middle of the room rubbing her already bruising shoulder, Jude hurried across to her. "Are you all right, Diana?" he asked hurriedly, keeping his voice low so that he wouldn't wake Claude. "I should have warned you. If I knew much about the state of drunkenness, I suppose I would have known it for myself." She laughed. "Ouch." She winced as she tried to move. "Goodness, that hurts." She blew out a great breath. "He caught you quite a savage blow." Jude laid a hand on her shoulder, gently rubbing it. "I dare say you will have a bruise for some days hence," he said, and continued to soothe her. As he knelt in front of her, his hand on her shoulder, Diana looked up into his gray-blue eyes. Her stomach felt greatly unsettled with excitement, and she almost laughed when an image of the kindly and romantic Julia Darnley sprung to mind. How Julia would have exclaimed over such a moment, how her pretty eyes would have opened wide and her hand would have flown to her chest in a bid to keep her beating heart contained. And now, finally, Diana understood it all. She realized then that Jude was studying her with equal intensity, his eyes searching hers as he slowly leaned towards her. When he kissed her finally, still caressing her painful shoulder, Diana felt as if she had fallen asleep and into a wonderful dream. For all that she had been married and widowed, Diana had never been kissed. Perhaps it had been a good thing these last years to have no idea what it was she was missing, for she would certainly have mourned its loss. "Forgive me, Diana," Jude said as he drew back from her and looked down. "I did not mean to offend you, I should not have." "Wait, you haven't offended me, Jude," she said and smiled at him. "Really, you mustn't think that. But I had meant to help you, and instead I have done nothing more than help myself." "But you have helped me, Jude." "All of this," she said, looking about the room. "All of it has helped. You had the foresight to see that I was not an easy character to deal with, and you worked around it. You focused me on helping others as a means of seeing that life went on, and I am bound to say that it was very clever of you, even if I couldn't see it from a mile away." "Then I am not as subtle as I had thought." "You are subtle, Jude. Just not subtle enough," she said and laughed. "But I am very, very grateful. Your kind words have helped to lift me from a pit of guilt, and I will be grateful to you forever. I will be grateful to you and my other friends for making me see that I am not such a terrible person after all." "Diana, you have never been a terrible person, I am certain of that. And for all that you thought you had been selfish in marrying Arnold, let me tell you now that he had thought that he had been selfish in marrying you. It had been a wonderful thing for him, in his last weeks, to have the company of a beautiful young woman, somebody new to talk to tell his stories to. He didn't care what became of his possessions when he was gone, only that Eileen and Adam be looked after. And so, meeting you, knowing that you needed the security of something you could call your own, he was glad to be able to provide it. You no more deceived him than he deceived you, Diana. You helped each other through your first difficult weeks here in America and his last weeks here on Earth. Can you not see that such unions, however brief, are meant to be? Arnold was not alone in the end, and you provided him that most important, most comforting, of services. How could you ever believe yourself to be bad? I suppose I couldn't forgive myself for the plan I'd made on the voyage here. It was born of anger and disappointment, and it was truly a very cold and calculating plan to make. And you were the very first to recognize it, Diana. I don't doubt that the coldness had all but disappeared by the time you married Arnold. You made your plan without a real person in mind, it was a man who didn't really exist. And when it came to it, your plan as you put it into action bore no real resemblance to the scheme you'd settled upon as a frightened young woman in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, did it? No, I suppose it didn't, she said and smiled. And finally, you have broken through, haven't you? You have forgiven me my sins as I said in the beginning you were trying to. It is easy to forgive when no sin has been committed, he said and laughed. And what of my own sin? What sin? I cannot believe for a minute that you have ever committed one, Diana said in a slightly teasing tone. What about finding myself so attracted to a grieving widow and doing nothing to dissuade myself from the feeling? Would you not think that a sin? No, I wouldn't, Diana said thoughtfully. To have such feelings is just human, isn't it? Yes, it is. But I have struggled with this myself as you have struggled with your own concerns. Arnold was my friend, you see, and I felt a similar guilt when I realized just how often I drew you to mind. But I am much more forgiving of myself than you are of yourself, for I very quickly came to terms with it. I realized that I had known Arnold long enough and well enough to know that he would be happy to see two people he cared about having a life that was truly worth living. And so, you see, I forgive myself just like that, he said and grinned broadly as he clicked his fingers. You really are the most peculiar minister I've ever met in my life, Diana said truthfully. And is that what you're offering me? A life that is truly worth living? That is exactly what I'm offering you if you'll have me. He reached for her again, this time laying a hand gently on her face. You see, I'm already in love with you, Diana. I have been for a long time. And I am in love with you. Not for a long time, just a long time by Jamestown standards. She smiled at him and leaned towards him, hoping for another wonderful, thrilling kiss. And his kiss was truly passionate, much more passionate than she had imagined a minister could manage. Still, he might be a minister, but he was also a young man. Well, I suppose the time has come to make another attempt to wake Claude, he said and eyed the sleeping man dubiously. Wish me luck. Good luck, she whispered. Epilogue. The day was mercifully not as chilly as the previous days had been. As Diana made her way through the churchyard to Arnold's grave, she looked up at the pale blue sky and knew that its cloudlessness spoke of a frosty evening to come. She knelt on the ground beside the grave and neatly arranged the last blooms of the year, the stragglers of late summer and early autumn. I suppose the next lot I bring to you, Arnold, will be nothing more than green leaves and berries. But it's the thought that counts, isn't it? She said in a quiet voice, looking all around her to be sure that she didn't have an audience. The graveyard was, however, mercifully empty, and she continued in her one-sided conversation with the man who had meant more to her than she would ever have imagined. Well, the winter will soon be upon us, Arnold. And in no time at all, I shall see my first year here in Jamestown. How the time has flown, and how much has happened. Once again, Diana looked over her shoulder. It's just that I have so much to tell you, Arnold, things that I don't really want other people listening to, she said, as if to explain her furtiveness. But then I suppose I'm not the first person to talk out loud to a departed loved one in a graveyard. And you are a loved one, Arnold. There was always room in my heart for you, even if it was not the space that a wife keeps for her husband. But I have learned enough now to realize that you would never have expected that, and I would like to thank you for it. I should have known it, of course, for you could never have loved another wife. If I had paid attention truly to how you spoke about your dear Jane, I would always have known that you really were happy with the gentle friendship the two of us shared. And it really was friendship, Arnold. I will always be grateful to you for listening to me, for hearing out my little schemes and ideas for your business. I still think of it as your business, even now. To me, it will always be your business. You will always be the finest merchant that Jamestown has ever known, and I will see to it that you are never forgotten. She cleared her throat and continued. And I hope you will be pleased to know that I have given a share of the business to Adam and Eileen. Of course, Eileen has no interest in the business itself, but I have seen to it that she will always take a share of the profits. I know that's what you would have wanted for them both. And Adam is extraordinarily helpful, taking on the lion's share of the work when I am with Jude helping his parishioners. Eileen keeps to the house, and it is as much like a new pin as ever it was. It's a great comfort to me to know that they will stay with us now, no longer servants, but partners. And I think you will be pleased to know that Jude has come to think of your house as his home. He really is a minister at heart, caring very little for possessions. But I believe he cares greatly for atmospheres, and he swears that he finds a comforting feeling every time he sets foot in your house. He has made it his home, and he talks of you often, his old friend. Diana could feel her eyes filling with tears, and she blinked hurriedly. I seem to display emotion very readily these days. She laughed. Caroline despairs of me. She has declared that I have become a little too romantic now that I am married for the second time. I wonder what you would think. I know you cannot speak to me now, Arnold, but I know in my heart that you would be very pleased to see me happy and settled with such a fine man as Jude Robbins. I think you have always known him to be a good man as he knew you to be a good man. I know at times, especially in the weeks following your death, I truly thought that I should never have married you, but now I will always be grateful that I did. She sniffed loudly and pulled a handkerchief from the pocket of her skirt. Because if it had not been for you, I would never have come into the care of Jude. Marrying you and spending those last weeks with you was the very thing which made the life I have now possible. As brief as our time was together, I learned so much then and after, of the true meaning of love. And knowing how dearly you loved your Jane, I realize now that there was not another person on earth who could have taught me as much about love as Arnold Price. Surely, there was not another man in the world who knew more about love than you. Her voice broke and the tears which had been threatening finally fell. And now I have the best news of all, my dear Arnold. Jude and I are expecting our very first child, hopefully the first of many. He is thrilled, more excited than I have ever seen him. And if I am honest, I am very excited myself. When my child is born, Arnold, I shall make sure they know of you. I shall bring my child here from time to time when I lay my flowers and tell you all my news. I will make sure that my child knows that life would not be so happy and complete as it is now had I never known you. Diana rose to her feet and brushed down the front of her skirt. I suppose the time has come to leave again, Arnold. But I know you will not be lonely without me, for you have Jane by your side once again. You are exactly where you should be. And as much as I mourned you then, I rejoice for you now, for I know that you have had your love returned to you. I know well how much you missed that love when you were still here. So, until the winter is here, and I come with my news, I pray you would watch over me as I make my hats and barter with the local farmers and the natives. Watch over me and I will do you proud, she said finally and leaned forward to touch the grass-covered grave with her hand before straightening up once again and turning to leave. Are you all right, my love? Jude was waiting for her in the arched doorway of the neat wooden church. Yes, I am well, she said and smiled up at him, raising up on tiptoes to kiss his cheek. I have just been giving Arnold all our news. And I'm sure that he is glad to receive it, Jude said warmly. Arnold always liked to know that things were going well for the people around him. I can't imagine that heaven has changed that. He laughed. Do you really think that he is with Jane now? I don't think it, Diana, I know it. What would be the point in this life if we were to part company forever when it came to an end? He pulled her into his bear-like arms and held her tightly. And I can tell you now that I have no plans to ever part company with you. I'm very glad to hear it, she said and nestled into him. Goodness, I am tired today. Well, you are carrying a precious but rather large cargo, I suppose. He laughed. And getting larger by the day, she said and leaned back from him to look down at her swollen belly. But I'm not complaining. I had never imagined in my whole life that I would be as happy as I am now. Her eyes began to fill with tears again. For goodness sake, will this wild emotion never end? She dabbed at her eyes. It's the only complaint I have about being with child. Perhaps it is not only being with child, Diana. Perhaps once a person's heart is open it stays that way. You always have something very lovely and very clever to say, Jude. And I love you for it, really I do. And I love you, Diana. He kissed her, his lips warm on her own. Come, let's head home. Yes, home, Diana said and threaded her arm through his to set off in the direction of the wonderful home that Arnold Price had left her. Thank you for listening to today's story from best-selling historical romance author Indiana Wake. If you enjoyed this audiobook, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new release, free audiobook, or series installment. You can find more sweeping frontier romances, mail-order bride stories, and heartfelt happily ever afters right here on this channel. Until next time, keep believing in courage, second chances, and love that stands the test of time.